at about an hour and a half in, a bit of a 10-minute break. So I'll let you guys know when that will start. So today's learning objectives, we're trying to cover a lot of information. We're going to present the PBIS, or Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports framework, as it would be used in the home. So we're going to cover those basic concepts to share with parents, such as understanding behaviors communication, teaching them how to collect ABC data if that's necessary in the home, or at least understand how to pay attention to those ABCs of behavior. Also learn some general and function specific prevention strategies, learn methods of teaching new skills to replace that challenging behavior. And then we'll also help them think about monitoring progress. We don't want to put too much on our families where they're collecting a bunch of data, but we definitely want them to be able to see the progress that's being made based on their interventions that they're putting in place. So throughout the training, you guys will be completing a home-based behavior intervention plan for the child in mind that you may have. So it could be a student that you're working with, or it could also be your own child or a child that you know. And you're going to use the brief behavior questionnaire and intervention plan. I will refer to it as the BB-QIP moving forward. Again, some of you guys may be familiar with this BB-QIP. We have changed it into a new format, so you guys will get some training on how to fill that out in the new format if you're already used to it. So now with PBIS, just across settings, you guys are probably mostly familiar with the school-wide PBIS framework. You know, it's that multi-tiered application of PBIS in schools, and you have your tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 levels of support. There's also a program-wide PBIS, which is more in the early childhood program. So you would see that in public and private preschool programs, public and private childcare or Head Start. And this is a program-wide implementation of the pyramid model, is an example. And then, of course, with positive behavior supports in homes, it covers all the same concepts that we're going to be talking about. We're all familiar with that, but we're going to see how we can implement that framework in the home. So with IPBS, you guys may already know that positive behavior support is an approach for changing an individual's behavior. So it's not just children, right? But PBIS is based on research, the science of behavior, which is applied behavior analysis, but then also making sure that we're considering the humanistic values of the student, the child, the individual that we're working with. We also want to be sure that we're focusing on the why the child or individual is engaging in that behavior, and then we can do a better job of teaching a new way to communicate their wants and needs, but also put some things in place to prevent those behaviors from happening. And then most importantly, we want to be sure that any of the strategies that we are implementing or suggesting, we always consider any of the factors that's impacting that individual, the family, what are their values, what are their resources, what can they do, what can they not do, what are they willing to do. So we have to keep all that in mind so that whatever strategies we are suggesting, that we know they're able to do it and they're willing to do it and see success with their children. So I love talking about understand, prevent, replace, because this is really the framework and the mindset that everyone should have across all tiers. So we're going to be focusing on the individualized positive behavior support, which falls into that tier 3 level of support. But you can always talk to your parents and always keep in mind that we first have to understand the behavior. We have to understand what's going on before and after the behavior, what's triggering it, how are we responding to that behavior. But then we also have to be sure that we figure out the why behind the behavior. Why is this behavior happening? And this is what we call the functional behavior assessment. Of course, that's the FBA. So once we have an understanding of those triggers and how we've been responding to the behavior and why the behavior is happening, then we can have the tools or the empowerment to prevent the behavior. The more you understand, the better you can prevent the behavior from happening, right? And this is our first component of the behavior intervention plan. And then lastly, because we can't prevent every single situation from happening, we have to be sure that we teach the child a replacement behavior or a new way to get their needs met. Because the need is still going to be there. They just have to learn a different way to get it. So here's just an overview of the research on IPBS. So of course, it's effective for all ages of individuals with disabilities 2 and older. It's effective for a diverse group of individuals with challenges. So any sort of intellectual disability, oppositional defiant disorder, autism spectrum disorder, emotional behavioral disorders, children at risk, so on and so forth. So it's effective across all diagnoses, all challenges. And it really is a comprehensive and evidence-based approach to addressing challenging behavior, and it's effective across all settings. So I spoke about this a little bit. So this is the pyramid that you guys are probably very familiar with in the school setting. So of course, the tier 1 levels of support are your school-wide PBIS supports that are in place for all kids. Then of course, if they need additional support, then you would go to your tier 2 levels of support, and that will be your small group counseling, or you pull them out for some extra help. And if those additional supports are still not effective, then the handful of kids that still need some support, they get that tier 3 levels of support here, where we actually assess and observe and collect data on the behavior so that we can really understand what's happening and why it's happening. And then we will put individualized supports in place for that particular student. So this is the pyramid for our little ones. So of course, on the foundation is the effective workforce. So we have to be sure that systems and policies are in place that promote and sustain the use of evidence-based practices. But for our little ones, and not just the little ones, like any kid, right? And the home-based kind of setting, we want to be sure that the kids know that they have a high quality supportive environment, a safe space, a safe place to call home and thrive, but then also having that nurturing and responsive relationships as well. So building those positive relationships is very, very important, especially for social and emotional competence for the little ones that are going to be in kindergarten and up, right? And then if they have those supports in place, of course, most of our kids are going to be successful. There will still be some kids that need additional support, and that's where we go into our tier 2 level of support, and we do more targeted social and emotional support. So this is where you might do, like in the home, having that social skills kind of training, self-regulation type skills. You might read some books to the child about keeping their hands to themselves and what to do when they get upset, so on and so forth. So these are things that can be transferred into the home environment. And then lastly, again, that tier 3 level of support is where we focus on really trying to assess the behavior, assess the situation, what's happening, and then really try to put some individualized behavior supports in place for that particular child. But you know, with being home, a family, excuse me, a family may not have multiple children. So it's not going to be like home-wide supports for all kids, you know? So it's really just about building a positive relationship with that child and just making sure that they know that they're safe. And then if they need additional supports, being sure to build on those social skills, anger management type skills. And then if you need to, excuse me, guys, I'm losing my voice. If you need to, then you are adding the individualized support. So for the rest of the training, we're going to be focusing more on that tier 3 level of support. But before we jump into that piece, we're going to just overview some of the universal promotion or that tier 1 levels of support that parents could be implementing at home. So when I work with families in the Parent Academy, I typically hear after the first session, when we go over some of these general tier 1 supports, that man, I'm not dealing with the challenging behavior as much anymore. And we haven't even gotten to the individualized support yet. So just keep that in mind when you're helping families. So one, we want to focus on teaching children what to do. So, you know, sometimes we focus a lot on the stop, no, don't. So instead of saying, will you please stop making a mess? Why do I always have to clean up after everyone all the time? This may sound very familiar to all of us. Instead of saying that, we want to say, okay, put the dishes in the sink, put your clothes in your bedroom, put your books in your bookshelf. So we want to be very clear what we want them to do instead of making that broad statement of why is it a mess in here? So we can't assume that they're just going to clean up because we make that statement. Parents will just have to be specific with what they want their child to do. Our brains aren't wired to process that stop and don't command. So again, if you're saying stop hitting your brother, you're only thinking about what you're doing at that time. The child is just focusing on the hit your brother piece, right? So we want to just be sure that we are focusing on exactly what they should be doing. So keep your hands to yourself would be a better way to say that. You also want to make sure that you're telling parents to be aware of their positive to negative ratio. It's very easy around this time too. I think everyone is just kind of in a weird space to focus on the negative. So we want to be sure that we're shifting our mindset and our parents' mindset to try to focus on 5 positive to 1 negative. So if there's any comments made throughout the day, it should be at least 5 good things. And if you have to say something that's corrective or anything like that, then just minimize how often that's happening. We don't necessarily have to start just praising every single thing that the child is doing during this time, but it's just really focusing on the good. Sometimes I will have to tell parents to write down some of those positive things that their child is doing, because it's so easy to get caught up in the challenging behavior that's happening or those frustrating behaviors that's happening all day. So sometimes just writing it down and having it on paper makes it a lot easier to be more positive towards that particular child. It's important to also think about questions that you can ask your kids or the kids about their interests. Kids love to talk about themselves, right? For the most part, but it has to be something that they're interested in, not what parents think that their child is interested in, especially for our older kids. Think about 5 funny things that you could share with the kids, and you can ask them to go for a walk or talk to them about their day, especially around this time. It's, you know, how are their days going? Really talking to them about that, because we're going through a lot of transitions as adults. I can only imagine what the kids are feeling, especially our kids transitioning into high school or our seniors transitioning out of high school during this time. It must be very rough. So being sure that we're focusing on the positive and having those positive interactions with our kids, because we can create more of a positive climate. And if we do create that positive climate in the home and that positive interaction, then they're more likely to be compliant with instructions or those less preferred tasks. So think about, like, in the school environment, you have one teacher that's, you know, the cool teacher, all the kids love them. And then you have the teacher that may be more of a stickler. And then the teacher that's real cool, you might hear them say like, oh, I don't have any problems with that student. He does everything that I tell him to do. It's kind of the same concept of, if you have that positive relationship, that good rapport with the student or with the child at home, they'll be more willing to do some of those less preferred things that you want them to do. So talk to your tween or teen. So some of the things that teenagers want to talk about, sometimes it can be hard to figure out what they want because they just kind of seem like, meh, I'm not really interested in anything, but they're very interested in family issues. They want to participate in those household decisions and, be told about the family problems within reason, right? So you might want to share some of those things, like maybe financial type stuff, and you think about, how you're teaching them some of those important financial decisions for their futures. Controversial issues. So teens have questions like, why can't I drink until I'm 21? That's an interesting conversation to have. What about their emotional concerns? They want to know how you are feeling about things as an adult, as their mom, as their dad. What are your thoughts on some of these issues? The big whys. So some teens begin to have those big philosophical questions about issues like war and politics and religion, especially the future. They're curious and concerned about what they can expect from the future. I think it just, they may not be as concerned as to what we're concerned about, but they still have some of those concerns about the future for sure. Current events, personal interests, parents' lives, all of those things. So there's different things that you can suggest that parents talk to their children about, especially now that they're at a time where they're spending lots of time with their kids now than they were before. So they're probably really stretched for what can we talk about, what can we do as a family. So really trying to work through having more face-to-face conversations and not get too caught up in the screen time. And then giving directions. So sometimes we can be guilty of not giving effective directions and then blame the student or the child for not being compliant or not following directions. So the first thing that we have to do is support families in how to give effective directions to their kids. So the first thing is to remove distractions before giving the direction. So if a child is super engaged in a Fortnite battle, that's probably not the best time to place an instruction because compliance with that instruction is probably going to be very low. So maybe waiting for that round to finish or giving some sort of warning like, hey, let me know when that round is done or when you're done with that particular section because I have some things to talk to you about, whatever the case may be. Minimize the number of directions. So right now we can be giving tons of directions to our kids because the opportunity is higher now because they are around more often. So we just have to be mindful of how many instructions we're placing on the students while they're at home. Individualize the way directions are given. So this is important, especially if there's multiple students in the home and there are different age levels and different grade levels, because we can't expect every kid to follow the direction in the same way. So just think about those tiered levels of support. So within the household, one child may need additional supports and need individualized directions compared to the other child. So just making that very clear to our families as well. When they're giving directions, tell them to state the instruction as a directive and not as a question. So sometimes we can be guilty of saying, can you please clean your room? Can you please do your online learning lessons? And if you ask, can you do something? The answer can definitely be no, I can't. And we can't really be too mad at the child for answering the question that was asked. So we want to be sure if we are placing an instruction that we're expecting them to follow, is that we're saying it as a directive and not as a question. State directions that are positive. So you don't, again, want to focus on what you want them to stop doing or what you don't want them to do. More tell them what it is directly that you're expecting them to do. It's important to give an opportunity for the child to respond. Sometimes we can spew off direction after direction after direction back to back, and the child has not even had an opportunity to follow the first one that you provided. So being sure that you give ample opportunity for them to process what it is that you're asking them to do and give them an opportunity to actually do it. But you don't want to necessarily wait like a long period of time. So it's really picking your battles and deciding when do you want that instruction to be followed. So if it's something that you're expecting them to do right away, just making sure that you're clear with that. If it's something that, you know, you could just write down 5 things that you want them to get done that particular day. It doesn't matter what time it gets done, as long as it's done by 9 p.m. that night, then that's giving them that opportunity to respond to their direction. Sometimes writing it down instead of having to verbally give them instructions all day is less aversive to the student. So that's one thing that you can share with the parents, like especially if it's an older child that can read and have a visual schedule and can follow that, then for sure try to just make a checklist of things you want them to do around the house or lessons that they need to complete. And then the instruction is not always coming from you as the person. When appropriate, give them options for following directions or choices. Again, if they have the opportunity to be a little bit in control of their day and what they do, and what time they do it, or if they have to do 3 different subjects, giving them that opportunity to choose which subject they want to do first, but you have to do one of these, they're more likely to follow the direction and do their lessons or do that task. And then, of course, you want to follow through with positive acknowledgement. So just be sure that, again, you're following that 5 positive to 1 negative ratio, and you're acknowledging the good things that they're doing throughout the day. Now with schedules, routines, and rituals, you want to develop a routine to just provide that structure and predictability for children and students. You could do a daily routine to help get ready for work and school in the morning. So even though we may not be like physically going out of the house, you could still have the routine of you still get up, take a shower, brush your teeth, wash your face, you know, get out your pajamas. So that's still going to be our routine for the day, and we're still going to have our schedule that we follow. And I think that will be helpful for families to just continue with that routine, because when that structure is not there, then children kind of get lost in what am I supposed to do? You just keep telling me to do stuff. But if there's a routine and a schedule, then they're able to follow that more closely. You have to teach the schedule sometimes too. We can't assume just because we write it down or talk about it, that means they're going to follow it. So just making sure that that's taught and you follow it consistently as best as possible. Also structure activities, especially for maybe our younger kids that have like a clear beginning, middle, and end. So if it's something that we have to do together, just being sure that there's a clear ending in sight, so they're not like asking, when are we done with this? When is this going to be over? So making sure that there's just that clear expectation of what's happening during that particular activity. If there's any changes in the schedule that's needed and it's a child that needs to be told in advance about changes, making sure that's happening as best as possible. We can't predict every single change that's going to happen throughout the day, but as soon as you know there's a change coming up, being sure to share that information if that's necessary. Transition cues. So this can be helpful for children that have some issues with transitioning from one thing to the next. So this could be preferred to preferred, or non-preferred to preferred, or preferred to non-preferred. It just depends on the kid. But if they have overall transition concerns, like the family saying, you know, anytime it's time to transition to the table to do their lessons for school, they're screaming and cursing and throwing things, then we would definitely have to put some things in place for like transitions. And you can do this even if there's not any challenging behavior, to just prevent it in the first place. So if there's just that predictability again, and then there's a orientation to some sort of warning or a timer, or you know, like how in school we have the bells, you know, that's a cue to the students that a transition is coming, even if it is to a preferred thing. So timers, we're going to talk about this a lot. This is very helpful for kiddos that need some transition help, or we're going to talk about timers, especially in some of the function-based prevention strategies. But these are some examples of timers that can be used. Families don't have to go out and purchase any new timers. If they have an oven, a stove, or microwave, or their phone, they can all be useful to help with using timers. Now, one thing with timers, you want to be sure that you use not only for the transitions to like a preferred, stopping a preferred thing to start a non-preferred activity. You also want it to be where you're setting the timer where they're getting a preferred item or activity as well. So in 5 minutes, you're going to be able to get dessert. In 10 minutes, we're gonna have a family game night, okay? So it's not always like, in 5 minutes, you have to stop playing your video game and do this work, because what's gonna happen is that timer is gonna always be associated with negative things, and then as soon as you say timer or the timer is pulled out, you might start seeing some challenging behavior just because it's associated with negative things. You guys are gonna see this video or a few video clips of this family who has completed the Parent Academy where they just document their experience with PBIS from beginning to end. So this is when they first started, and they're just explaining their experience with their child that engages in challenging behavior.
I guess when we missed out on activities that our family members were having, I guess you felt defeated, depressed.
I felt abandoned by the family. I felt like our family wasn't supporting us, and our entire family was excluded from an event because of our child, and I didn't think that they were helping us to know what to do with our kid. I mean, if anything, we had some pretty tough comments about, well, maybe you should consider an institution. And some of these things are well-meaning. They actually meant well by saying these things about our child, but none of it was really good advice.
I guess you have a lot of self-pity. You're like, you're kind of like, I can't believe this is what my life was turned into. And it's like, and maybe that's what we felt the most is like, how did this happen? How do we go from where we were, 3 years ago or 4 years ago to where we are, today, not being able to leave our house. So it's kind of the worst feeling.
Other people looked at us like there was something wrong with our parenting skills.
Certainly before PBS, people, you just see it. You go to the grocery store and you have somebody tell you, this is the way you should do it, or your child's doing that because whatever, you're not spanking him, or give him a little spanking and he'll be fine, or whatever, So you have all those. Everybody has their own opinion on how you should raise your child without even knowing what your situation is. So,
I think strangers always gave us advice when we were out, and our family always gave us advice, and it was somewhere always along the line of discipline, punishment.
So if you could just kind of share in the chat box some of your reactions to this video. Is this something that you can relate to yourself, or thinking about the students and families that you're supporting? Just share with us a little bit your reactions to what they said in this video, please. I've heard this type of thing from many parents. It's heartbreaking, for sure. I agree. The isolation many families feel is something that is all too common, but not always shared. That is so true. And I think it's helpful that you guys are here to support the families through this time, because I think it is hard for a lot of families to admit when they're struggling, especially if they feel like they're going to be judged or given strategies that are just not going to work. It reminded me of how parents are judged by their children's behavior, for sure. This makes my heart hurt, and it really does. I feel like many parents go through various forms of this. Agreed. I see a lot of families shut down with unsolicited advice. They feel like they are failing. Exactly. I think it is pretty common idea that we can fix behavior through punishment or discipline. Many families struggle with the right thing to do and feel pressure to punish a behavior they don't understand. Leslie, really, really good point. It's also challenging to share the parents' perspective to school staff. I see both sides, but we have to work as a team and support wherever is needed. Very true. Encouraging faith, school, and communal organizations that intentionally reach out, name, and offer support is so needed, for sure. I see many people who limit going out due to their child's behavior. It's very sad. Very true. I can relate. We can teach a family member with autism how to behave in public. It was very hard because she was always having tantrums. It took a year. That's a long time to, but I'm glad you stuck with it because it's teachable, but it will take some time. Unsolicited advice and punishment can make behaviors worse, for sure. So that's why we always stress that understand piece. Like, we can't just look at what the behavior is and sometimes like, oh, your child is tantruming in public, this is all you need to do. Or I worked with a child that hit their parents all the time and this is what we did, you should try that. We can't just do that. We really have to focus on the understand piece and know what is going on surrounding that behavior so that when we are giving advice or if the parents are asking for advice, that we're giving effective strategies that's going to work based on the information that we're gathering. I see this happen a lot, but the sad thing is that our parents do not know how to help the child, and it does become overwhelming for the parents, for sure. I think that it is important to really understand what others are working through and what strategies they are already using, for sure. Parents may be working very hard on these behaviors. They obviously would not want those behaviors displayed and are trying to find the best strategies. I definitely agree. The first step is really understanding what they've already tried, because sometimes too, and this is why we say it's a team-based approach, sometimes the things that they've already tried may be working and maybe it worked one time and then the next day it didn't work, so they just gave up, right? So we also have to tell them to stay the course and don't give up just because it doesn't work every single time. Just it's going to take some time and we have to be consistent with the strategies. So I always tell parents that it's not going to be an easy fix. It's not going to be just a magic wand that you're going to wave and all the behavior is going to stop. We really do have to just tell them, you have to put some work in at first, but if you stay consistent and do the best that you can, no one is perfect. Even myself as a behavior specialist and my child, I have some things that I still reinforce and I understand exactly what it is I'm doing, but I'm human, it is what it is. Children too often hook parents and staff emotionally and bring adults into power struggles. You are so right. How notice these and back away from them is important for all of us. Yes, to notice when children are maybe pulling us into that back and forth emotional struggle. That's important, and I think that's what I get caught up into. So it's hard. It's easier said than done, and I think if we tell parents that and we understand that they're not going to be 100% perfect and we're not here to judge, we're just here to support and help. I always say, I'm giving you the knowledge to empower you, right? Knowledge is power. So now that you have the information, use it as you can, but just increasing your awareness is enough to make you feel a little bit more empowered and in control of what to do and what not to do. Thank you for sharing those, guys. That was awesome. So we're going to transition into the brief behavior questionnaire and intervention plan. So Dr. Graybill, I forgot to mention Dr. Emily Graybill, I'm sorry. She's my supervisor and colleague at Georgia State University at the Center for Leadership and Disability. She's also on the call here, and she's going to be supporting me and answering questions in the chat that you guys may have that I may not capture. She's also just posted the link to the BB Quip in the chat. So if you could just highlight that and copy and paste it into a web browser. So let me just tell you a little bit about the BB Quip. We have different versions of this BB Quip. There's a school version. We created this Parent Academy for Educators version just for you guys. There's a home base for parents version. There's some versions also in Spanish, and there's paper versions and there's online formats as well. So this format is using Qualtrics. Now with Qualtrics, you are able to leave that browser or close it out, and it will save your previous responses, and it will take you right back to that particular spot when you copy and paste that same link. Now, the only thing with that is you have to complete the survey for that one child entirely so that you can move on to do another child in that web browser. So say you wanted to work on 2 kids BB Quips at the same time, then you can copy and paste this link into Google Chrome, for example, and you can start one child's in Google Chrome. And then if you wanted to do another student at the same time, you could copy and paste that link into Firefox or Internet Explorer, for example, and it will allow you to start a new BB Quip for that particular student. So just be aware of that you don't have to sit there and complete it from start to finish if you don't have the time, but just know that you will have to put it in different browsers if you're trying to do multiple at the same time, okay? So I'm gonna go to my BB Quip. And we're going to put this information in for a student that you have in mind, or it could be your own child, it could be a family's child that you're supporting, whatever the case may be. We're just gonna walk through it. This is not required, but it's good practice, and I'm going to model from beginning to end throughout the presentation. Can you guys see my web browser? Just give me a yes, make sure that I'm, okay, perfect, thank you. So what are your initials? What we try to do is make sure that everything is confidential, so we don't necessarily want full names or anything like that. So I'm putting my initials in. I am doing it in the perspective of a behavior specialist. So you could be a teacher, assistant teacher, you could be an administrator, whatever the case may be. So you can select other and type in if these do not apply to you. So write the child's initials only. So I'm focusing on TT, who is a male, and he's 13 years old. And he's currently not receiving any services. So this is for, you see there's 2 years old up to 22 years old, right? So if they are receiving therapy services, you can click yes, and it will take you to this page to check if they're getting Babies Can't Wait services, or if they're getting private or school therapy. Or if it's not on this list, you can also type it in here. But since my child or student is not having any services or receiving any services, I can go back and say, okay, no, they're not currently receiving services. If you ever have to go back and correct something, please just hit the back button here. Don't worry about hitting it on the web browser. So how would you describe the child's personality? I say that TT is affectionate, curious, engaging. So we want to focus on all the positive traits. The purpose of this section of the BB Quip is to emphasize that the child is not just their behavior. So we can get highly focused on the challenging behaviors that the student is engaging in. And we want to be sure that we're paying attention to all the good things, the good qualities of this child. So you could select all of these. You can add more in this other section if you need to, if it's not on this list, okay? So at the bottom here, it asks you to list the preferred items, activities, or situations that your child or student enjoys the most. So here I have playing video games, hanging out with friends, and watching how it's made are the top 3 things that I could think off the top of my head or from communication with the parent. This is important information because later on we're going to talk about how can you build a positive interaction or rapport with the child. So being sure that you're listing the things that they like, you can be able to use that information to build that positive relationship. So you also want to list non-preferred items or activities that the child does not enjoy. So TT does not like cleaning his room or washing dishes or doing math assignments, all right? And what is something that may frighten or upset TT? Presenting in front of class. So I'm doing it as the perspective of I'm familiar with TT in the school environment, but also we're thinking about the home as well during this time. I think that was our stopping point. No, this is our stopping point. So this is where we're gonna stop and then we're gonna come back to the PowerPoint. So just let us know how does your student communicate his wants or needs. So my particular student speaks in sentences and can get things for himself, but there might be some kids that are not talking and may be using a device or can use sign language or a picture system. Some kids may just take your hand and lead you to whatever they want, or they might stare, make eye contact or actually stare at the item. So you would just select all the things, mostly what did they use the most to communicate, but you can select different options as well. This one is another good one. So like if it's a child that is just beginning to speak or talk, but you see that they are repeating just about everything someone else says, that's an important information to note so that when you're thinking about teaching new skills, you know that they can repeat things on command and you can start teaching them how to say things. All right, so I'm just gonna click forward, but we're gonna get back to that after a while. So I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint. Oh, and one thing I discovered, if you do have to stop at a page and close it out, just be sure you hit next before you close out, because that will save your answers for that page. I discovered that just today. All right, so behavior is communication. Just know that behavior just doesn't happen because kids are quote unquote bad. There's some sort of communication behind the behavior, and some kids communicate in different ways. So there's some kids, of course, that can talk fluently. They might make eye contact. They might just nod their head. They might even do an eye roll. That's communication too, right? Some kids may cry or punch or hit another person. So just know that these are different ways or how communication can look. But we want to really dig a little deeper and try to figure out what are the messages behind that communication, especially when it comes to the challenging behavior. So behaviors can be to request certain things, whether it's objects, activities, or a person, to escape or avoid certain situations, instructions, people. It could be for a reaction or to get help with something. They might want more information or need more information and might communicate that. Sometimes there could be some sensory stuff going on as well, and that's a communication message. So when we think about challenging behavior, we want to focus on not necessarily the frustrating, irritating behaviors that may happen every once in a while. Those aren't necessarily challenging behavior unless it's like really dangerous and intense. So just to get a definition of what we're talking about when we say challenging behavior is any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with learning or engagement in pro-social interactions with peers and adults. So yes, our students or our parents may be saying like, my child is, just getting on my nerves all day. I mean, it's to be expected, but we can't really say that that's a challenging behavior, but to do like a whole behavior support plan for, but we can talk to them about those tier 1 levels of support and how they can kind of change the climate at home so that the behaviors aren't as irritating or frustrating. But when it comes to the challenging behavior, we're talking about behaviors that are not responsive to the use of those developmentally appropriate guidance procedures. So some examples that we have written here include saying no to in response to task demands, cursing, screaming, property destruction, aggression. So I want you guys to just list some of the challenging behaviors that you're currently experiencing, whether it's a family that you're supporting, a student that you work with, your own child. Just list out some of the things that you're currently dealing with when it comes to challenging behavior, I should say. Defiance. Physical aggression, biting, elopement, defiance. Okay. Now, are these within the school environment, or you're hearing some of these things also at home where you're trying to support families dealing with these challenging behaviors? Home, okay. School, non-compliance. So a lot of non-compliance, not following directions, sleeping, hiding under the table, yelling, okay. So non-compliance is that's a behavior that we definitely need to define some more. We're going to talk about what that looks like shortly. Thank you for sharing. And you can continue sharing as I continue. Yep, not doing their schoolwork at home. That's good. That's a big one. Okay. So when challenging behavior happens, most of the time these behaviors are working for the students. So if I yell or curse or hide under the table or whatever, or elope or bite, I am able to get out of doing that task that I don't want to do, or I'm getting the attention that I'm looking for, even if it's negative attention. So we want to be sure that we are teaching our families how to navigate some of these behaviors where they're not reinforcing it. And it's probably not on purpose, like they're not trying to reinforce the challenging behavior, but just know that our parents that we're supporting also have their own ways of communicating that they don't want to do something or they don't want to deal with something. So keep that in mind as well. So if my child is cursing me out and I just don't want to deal with it, and I just told him to do his math work and he's just cussing and fussing, I'm like, you know what? I don't even want to deal with this right now. And I just, whatever, and walk away. Even though if I don't engage in that, he still got out of doing that math assignment or that work. So we have to teach our parents to be mindful of the instructions that they're placing and when they place it. And if they're not going to follow through with that instruction, or they don't want to deal with the challenging behavior that may come about for placing that instruction, then just don't place the instruction at all. Because what's going to happen is that the students will learn you're going to place instructions, lots of them, and not follow through with it. So if I just push back just a little bit, then I escape. So we just have to start thinking about those things and being mindful of really trying to put some prevention strategies in place, especially when it comes to escape and refusal and non-compliance. It's really about a motivation type thing. How can we motivate our students to want to do these things? And we'll talk about that more later on. Challenging behavior communicates. So again, behaviors communication. I love this shirt. I think I'm going to order me one because it's awesome. But just know that children that do not have really great language skills to communicate typically engages in some challenging behavior because, can we mass order? I think that's a great idea. They may not have the ability to communicate appropriately, so they've learned that their challenging behavior will get their needs met. Also, a child may have some really good communication, can speak in full-blown sentences, but they still will engage in challenging behavior, and it's just maybe a social skills issue. And again, it's just a learned thing that I may ask appropriately, and this is another thing to talk to parents about. Their children may be asking appropriately for things. They may be asking appropriately to, well, can I do this later? And it may not be in the best tone, but I would rather you say, can I do this later, than bite me or throw something because I keep pushing you to work. So it's really talking to parents about picking their battles and listening to their kids, especially during this time, because we are just all in a different space right now, and they're not used to doing work from home, schoolwork at home. Home is their safe space where they come and chill and relax. Now you're telling me that my mom is going to be, or my dad is going to be telling me, do your science, do your math, do your social studies, and it's a lot. So we just have to be very understanding of that. So when we think about defining behavior, we want to be sure that there's some sort of specific definition or an operational definition when it comes to these behaviors that we're talking about. So we want to include behaviors or list behaviors that are observable and measurable. So it's totally okay to have that that label of, you know, non-compliance. So that's the behavior. But we can't just stop there. We have to define what exactly does non-compliance look like. We could have that aggression label. Okay, so whenever these behaviors happen, we consider it aggression, but we have to list out what does aggression look like specifically for this child. So remember that this is important, especially since you're supporting families, or if this is happening in the school environment, everyone has to be on the same page and know when the behavior happens. But if we just name it aggression, then that could be anything under the sun for the student, and people will not be collecting reliable or accurate data. So when you think about an operational definition, it's always individualized, because if I use the term disrespect for 3 different kids, all 3 different kids could be disrespectful, quote unquote, and it looks very different from kid to kid. So here's some examples of some like operational definitions for different behaviors. So disrespect, yelling at parents, yelling at siblings, boom, right? But if I just say disrespect, what exactly is that if I didn't have the yelling at parents and yelling at siblings? Work refusal, that's a big one. Playing video games instead of schoolwork, saying, no, I'm not doing anything. Folding their arms, putting their head down, throwing things across the room. All of that could be work refusal or non-compliance, but we have to figure out what exactly does this child or student do when they're non-compliant. Aggression, same thing. When I think aggression, I think about physical aggression, so like hitting siblings or parents, but I've heard people say verbal aggression. What does that look like? Because someone can say verbal aggression is yelling at parents or yelling at siblings, and they consider that verbal aggression. So again, try to be specific in the way that you talk about behavior, so that you know that everyone is on the same page and understands exactly what it is that you're talking about for that particular student. And same with hyperactivity. That can look very different from student to student, child to child. So for this example, this child, when they're hyperactive, we're talking about when they're jumping on the furniture. Does that make sense? If you guys want to take a stab at, I'm going to continue, but the behaviors that you listed. So some of you guys said like defiance, refusal, a lot of defiance, refusal, non-compliance. I want y'all to start thinking about, like, if you have a student in mind, define what non-compliance, work refusal, that defiance, those terms sound like, or look like, or sound like for the students that you have in mind. So I'm allowing you guys to practice a little bit of making some more operational definitions for refusing to do work, non-compliance, defiance. Give me observable and measurable terms for those. Ignores requests, pretends not to hear, sneaking on to other sites while working on their Chromebook. That's a really good example. Tell me a little bit more about that, Leslie. What does ignoring a request look like? What does pretending not to hear look like? Do they continue to play video games? Are they, and I'm gonna be honest, non-compliance is like the hardest one to really define, because remember, some of you probably are familiar with the dead man's test, right? If a dead man can do it, then it's not a behavior. So a dead man can refuse to do their schoolwork, but if you say refusing to do schoolwork by tearing up his homework, perfect, because we can see him tearing up the assignment. Not staying seated in class, so walking around, right? Walking around the class. Hunches over in seat, places head on desk, pulls shirt over. Yes, good. When teacher gives a request, they look around and do not follow the directive. They suddenly become deaf. Leslie, you are funny. When given a directive, TT says no and walks out of the room. Yep, that's a good one. Focusing on what a sibling is not doing. Oh, that's an interesting one. So they're looking at the sibling, instead deflecting. Oh, okay. So they talk about what the sibling is doing instead of, see, even there, I wasn't clear. So when you said focusing on, I'm like, Are they just looking at them instead of doing what they're supposed to do? But it sounds like they're just complaining about what the other sibling is doing. Got it. So that's why it's important to just talk through. So then now that I know that a little bit better, if I see it happening, I can take data on it. But I would have just been focusing on, oh, he's staring at the sibling right now. So you just want to make sure you're clear. So thank you guys. That was an awesome practice. So we're going to go back to your BB Quip, right? Let me get to mine. Perfect. All right. So now, since we talked about the behaviors, we are going to select the behaviors that the student is engaging in. So how you do this is I put cursing here at very problematic, but you can have moderately problematic behaviors or slightly problematic. On the page, you have 2 behavior lists. But again, you do not have to just go with what's on this list. These were just examples from our brains. So you have an other, so you can fill in exactly what it is that the child is engaging in, and then you can rank it wherever you need to. So all you do is click and drag. So if I wanted to say like spitting, I think I already have it, but spitting on others, I could type that in and put it wherever I need to, okay? So for TT, he's not doing that. I put he's cursing, is very problematic. And you decide that you have to prioritize, right? Is it very problematic? Is it slightly? Cursing for me is very problematic because it's happening very often. He's also yelling and screaming, but it kind of is in combination with the cursing. So I put moderately problematic with that, right? So my behavior that I'm gonna focus on for the rest of this plan is cursing. That's the one I'm gonna choose. But just know that if you have, like say yelling and screaming and cursing always happen at the same time, and say that yelling always happens right before he starts spewing off curse words, then I can say that I'm going to target the yelling and screaming and see what happens right before that behavior and what's happening after, so that we don't even get to the cursing. But that's not the case for TT. It's sometimes he yells and screams, sometimes he'll curse. So I'm gonna focus on the cursing, all right? And then why did I select cursing? I selected it because it negatively impacts the quality of life for this student, and it is interfering with learning. So you can select any of the ones here that applies. And let me go back real quick with your behavior. Just be sure, like here, you can define it more. You know, so cursing by saying, I'm not gonna put curse words, but you know what I'm saying? Like you can put anything that you need to in there to be very specific, because there could be something that's very unique to that child. If you do want to say non-compliant, you can put non-compliant by what? Putting his hood over his head, by folding his arms, by whatever the case may be. So you can actually type that in there, because it will then populate it here and it'll say, well, why did you select non-compliance by putting his hood over his head and folding his arms? Okay, so whatever you type in that box is what's going to keep popping up for the rest of the questionnaire. So here, let me make sure I'm not going too far beyond. I might be. Let's see, we're supposed to stop. Okay, we're supposed to stop at how do you know this? So let's go back. So how long does cursing last is my concern, because he does not just say 1 or 2 curse words. It will be like a long slew of just going at it with the curse words. So it's more about how long it lasts once it gets started. So the cursing lasts typically minutes. It doesn't go for hours. Now, if you hit frequency, then you're going to be populated to a different set of questions, but you're still on the same track as I am. And then I would say cursing lasts about 3 to 4 minutes per incident. And you scroll down and I'll say that I know this because I've talked to the family and it's kind of my best guess. Or you can also put other, you know, we took data at school and talked with the parents. Okay, so we got the information not only from data collection at school, but we also talked to the parents about the behavior. Okay, so we're gonna stop there, but I clicked so my answers are saved, and then we're gonna go back to the PowerPoint together and get back to those questions. All right, so I'm gonna play this video. If you are not done with the BB Quip, you can play, continue on to how do you know this and stop there while you listen to this family explain about understanding and communication of their son's behaviors.
When we went out anywhere, just going out, we just decided to stay home because it was easier, or taking turns going out, or I wait for you to come home from work. And
we couldn't even go in and out of Publix or Walmart because we couldn't get to the door without having a tantrum. Or certainly could go to a restaurant and sit down and have dinner for a half hour. Just simple everyday life things.
We became isolated, not even eating dinner at home or giving the kids baths or simple things at home. So we ended up just developing routines around Brenton, and that was what we did. You know, I think everybody revolved around him.
I guess what made Brendan tough before PBS was that we had no way to communicate with him. We didn't know what he wanted. He was frustrated. We were frustrated. And it was just a lack of communication of understanding why he was doing what he was doing, and then how to resolve it. That's probably what made it the toughest for me. So she just didn't know just how to communicate with him.
I think it was so hard when he would just fall down, and I had to carry him in places, carry him out of places. We were spectacles. People just watched us, they judged us.
Any initial reactions to that video? I'm just gonna share that just kind of reinforces the importance of understanding that communication piece. Because again, if you can understand what they're communicating or what the needs are behind the behavior, then you have that knowledge of, okay, now I feel like I'm able to put things in place and do something about this behavior now because I have a better understanding of what the needs are. So we're gonna jump into the functions of behavior. Some of you guys are probably familiar with this. So the functions, the 4 research supported functions are escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. And a very easy way to remember these are to remember that everybody eats, so EATS. Function is just the why of the behaviors occurring. What is the purpose? What is the child or the individual trying to communicate through that behavior? If you could put words to that behavior, what would the child be saying? So it's like, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. I don't want to be around this person. This is too hard. This is too easy. You know, whatever the case may be. I don't want to do it. I don't want to be here. That's escape. All right. So that could be the yelling. It could be the cursing. It could be falling to the floor, but it all depends on what's going on in that environment. But that's what they're communicating through their behavior, and not just challenging behavior. If I, you know, when we're thinking about the replacement behavior, it has to match the same function. So instead of tantruming to say, you know, I don't want to be here, instead of tantruming, you could say, no, thank you. All right. So you want to be sure that you are focusing not just on the challenging behavior functions, but you also want to focus on the function of the replacement or the appropriate behavior. Then attention is another function where we talk about the behavior occurring because they want some sort of attention or interaction, or it could also be some sort of reaction that happens after the behavior. So if you get that reaction, even if you don't say anything, but you roll your eyes after the child engages in the behavior, or you do a deep sigh like, just doing that could be bringing attention to the behavior and maintain that behavior over time. So you want to be very careful on how you're responding to the behaviors that's happening. Tangible, that one is a behavior occurs to get access to something that they may want. So it could be an activity or it could be a preferred item, but it's always something that's wanted as far as like a tangible item. So just know that you could delay or deny or terminate access to something. And sometimes kids have issues with all three of those things, or sometimes it could be, it's just when you tell them no. So if they ask for something and you have to tell them no, that's when challenging behaviors occur. But if they have to wait, you don't see challenging behavior. And if you have to say, okay, time to get off, they don't have any challenging behavior. But just denying them complete access is an issue, all right? And then sensory can be a little bit confusing, but just know the behavior itself, that's what we're focusing on. The behavior itself is enjoyable or feels good to that person. So for example, I play with my hair. I don't know why I play with my hair, but I do a lot of hair twirling, right? So that would be considered a sensory function, because I'm doing that right now that I'm talking about it. And you guys can't see me, which is great. So it's something that I've learned that I enjoy doing, but I know it's appropriate in some areas and it's not appropriate in other areas, right? But I can do this when I'm completely alone for hours and hours just because I enjoy it. I don't know why, all right? So think about the students and think about yourself and those behaviors that you may engage in that bring some sort of sensory relief or sensory input for you that's not maladaptive, and you would do it just because it feels good. That's what we call that sensory function. So Christy, I'm sorry, you brought up power and control. So this one is not supported by the research yet. So we want to just emphasize that, yes, it may seem like power and control, but you want to dig a little deeper and see how it may fall under one of those 4 functions. Because yes, we may be going through that power struggle and going back and forth, but that power struggle within itself may be that attention that they're getting. They like that going back and forth, getting your one-on-one attention, seeing you be affected by the interaction at that moment. So it will fall under that attention, because if you did not go back and forth with that person, if you did not give it any sort of attention, then they're probably going to be like, wait, you're not reacting? You're not saying anything? What? I thought you were going to get mad at that. So that's where is that attention piece. So it may feel like power and control, but you have the control to understand, oh, you're just trying to get my attention, or you're just trying to get a rise out of me, and I'm not going to give you that. I'm not going to reinforce that behavior by giving you the attention or reaction that you're looking for. Also, with escaping a task, it could be a combination of the two. If I engage you in this back and forth conversation and argument about doing my lessons right now, I'm delaying that task. And over time, you might just be like, you know what, forget this. I don't even want to deal with it. And then now the child doesn't have to do their work. So you have to really dig a little bit deeper and see what really is going on, because typically it will fall under those one of those 4 functions. The behavior should not drive the intervention. The function should drive the intervention. Bottom line, we cannot focus on just what the behavior is. We really have to put interventions in place that are aligned with the function or the reason why the behavior is happening. So some examples of function-based interventions, especially with our little ones, and if we have a new baby, we're pulling our attention away from our firstborn, right? So we will naturally start to give attention, like more attention to our first kiddo, especially when the baby is asleep, or when the baby is up, allowing the firstborn child to help and bring the diaper and whatever the case may be, and giving them lots of praise. So that's not like a major intervention that a behavior specialist told them to do. You're naturally doing some of these function-based interventions already. Parents are. So you can let them know and acknowledge some of the things that they're already doing at home to try to prevent some of those behaviors from happening, and just letting them know you're on the right track. Just keep going. Same with students in school. A student may be talking in class or during transitions. If you give them a few seconds to talk, or ask them a few questions right before a transition, that may lessen their motivation to have to talk so much during that transition because they just got to talk a minute with you about what they did that day or the day before. Okay, so those are some function-based interventions examples that are like kind of real life, but we're also going to talk about some more. So when you think about the ABCs of behavior, this is kind of how we get to the function of the behavior, because we have to see what's going on before and after the behavior. So the before is the antecedent. We have the slow trigger where we have the slow trigger where that kind of sets the stage for the behavior to occur. So we kind of see when a child is hungry, when they're tired, when they're in math class, when they're in the hallway, when they are in Walmart. So it's kind of locations and kind of a state of emotion. Like when they're upset about something, they're more likely to engage in the challenging behavior when you tell them to do something. The fast trigger is just that, what happens immediately before the behavior. So being hungry may set the stage and they're more likely to engage in the challenging behavior. And then you say, I need you to go clean your room. And because you said go clean your room, that's when they hit or they yelled or they cursed, okay? So that is the antecedent. So you want to pay attention to where the behavior is happening and when the behavior happens. So that's kind of like that context or slow trigger. But you also want to pay attention to who is it happening with as well, because that gives you information as far as, especially parents, if they're like, this behavior doesn't happen with mom. It doesn't happen with mom at all, but it's always happening with dad. We have to pay attention to, well, how is dad interacting with the child versus mom? How does he place the instruction versus how mom places the instruction? We notice that mom gives a 5-minute warning and then tells the child, okay, you have 10 minutes and then you can take a break. But then dad is like, do your work, right? So there's no interventions or whatever in place. So we see more challenging behavior with dad than with mom. So after the antecedent, we look at the behavior. That the trigger is what the behavior that happens after that trigger. So what does it look like? So remember that observable and measurable terms. How long is it lasting? What's the duration? How many times is it happening? That frequency count. And then the consequence, when we think consequence, sometimes we think about discipline, right? Or we think about the punishment. We want to think about, when we say consequence in this case, is just how did others respond to the behavior? Did they ignore the behavior? Did they place the child in a timeout? Did they praise? Did they reprimand? Did they give them 5 more minutes? Did they end up giving the item right away? So just how did others respond? And this could be the adults, or it could also be the other siblings or peers in the environment. And the siblings and peers could also be the trigger. So the adults in the rooms are not doing anything. It's really more about the peer interaction, how they're triggering the behavior and how they're responding. So be aware of that as well. Here's some examples of what antecedent behavior consequence data collection will look like. So it's not just about challenging behavior. You will have ABCs. It's kind of, we call a 3-term contingency, where there's always some sort of antecedent to a behavior, whether it's appropriate or not. And then there's always a consequence or something that happens after the behavior. So we're gonna do a quick little practice on identifying function based on these ABC data collection points here. So let me just tell you, this is at face value. We cannot just determine the function of a child's behavior just based on one instance. We need more information, we need patterns, we need to ask a little bit more questions so that we can really understand what's going on before and after, before we can really say, we hypothesize that it could be attention or could be escape function. But just for practice purposes, at face value, when you read this, just tell me what you think the child is communicating through their behavior. So why are they sitting down? So for example, I'm gonna do the first one. The parent asks the child to sit down on the floor is the antecedent. The behavior is the child sits down immediately. And then the consequence is that the parent says, wow, you sat down right away, thank you, okay? So I would say, I'm gonna show you the poll. I would say that the child is sitting down. The function of the sitting down in this example was probably for that attention. They've learned that when I sit down or when I follow directions, that I'm going to get some praise. So I'm going to continue to do as I'm told so that I can continue to get that attention. Okay, so that's face value. There could be other things going on. We don't have a ton of information, but this is just to kind of get some practice. All right, so I'm going to end this one. And then we're gonna do the next one. Child sees a McDonald's sign while riding in the car. The child asks for food from McDonald's, and then the parent gets the child McDonald's. All right, so I'm going to relaunch, and I want you guys to select which function do you think the child is engaging in. Excellent. All right, give it 5 more seconds before I end the poll, and then we'll move on. All right, so 100% of you who did answer said tangible. So yeah, at face value, I would say the child is asking for McDonald's because they want access to a preferred item, whether that's French fries, that's the Big Mac, whatever the case may be. They're asking for that food because they want that tangible item, all right? Let's try the next one. It's noon, your child has not eaten since breakfast. They open the refrigerator door and stands in front of the refrigerator. Parent tells the child to close the refrigerator door. Your best guess with the information that you have here. All right, I'm gonna end polling. Thank you for those who did respond. And yes, I would agree with that, 100% say tangible. So just looking at what's happening before and after, it's noon and he has not eaten since breakfast. He opens the door and stands in front of the refrigerator. It could be tangible. It could also be attention because the parent tells the child to close the refrigerator door. So that's where we would need more information to see, does the behavior stop when the child is given attention? Was that a way for him to, yes, I haven't eaten since breakfast, but mom's also busy at the moment. So if I stand in front of the refrigerator door that's open, I'm more likely to get their attention. So it could be either. So that's why we need a little bit more information, but at face value, we can assume that it's more of a tangible function. All right, let's do the next one. Child is alone in her room. Child begins jumping on the bed and they remain alone in her room and continues to jump on the bed. All right, I'm gonna close the poll in 2 seconds. Okay, so I can see why someone would say attention here. Again, face value, we could say it might be attention. If we had more information, we might know like, okay, she's alone in her room, she's jumping on the bed, and maybe sometimes mom does or dad runs in and says, stop jumping on that bed, right? And she's learned that's how I can get a reaction or get attention from a parent or an adult. Sensory, I would say it's sensory only because with the information that we have here, at face value, she's alone, she's jumping on the bed and she remains alone. So she's jumping on the bed at this moment because she just enjoys jumping on the bed and will continue to do that whether someone responds or not. So excellent. All right, last one. Parent announces that it is virtual work time for the child. Child returns to their bedroom and closes the door. Parent returns to their own Zoom work call. Yep. Okay, I'm ending the poll. All right, I would definitely agree with escape, right? So we don't know whether they closed the door and got to working on their virtual lessons behind the, behind closed doors or whatnot. But this is just an example of placing an instruction, the child not doing it, and then the parent does not follow through. So in the future, when when an instruction is placed, the child may or may not follow the direction because they've learned. Sometimes when I do, they just kind of leave me alone, and sometimes, you know, I will do it and, you know, it's fine. So it's just being very aware of when you're placing instructions. And I'm very guilty of this myself. So it's easier said than done, but it's just about increasing that awareness and that knowledge to your parents so that they can know, hey, just be careful when you place that instruction. If you're not going to follow through, you know, and you can't, that's understandable. Just then don't place the instruction at all. It's hard. It's very hard though. All right. So that's it for the poll. We're going to keep going. Children may exhibit what looks like the exact same problem behavior, but for very different reasons. So we have John's screen time is taken away. He yells at mom, and his mom throws his phone away or places his phone on the counter and walks away. So we can say that's a tangible reason. Gabrielle is told to start work. She yells at mom, so same behavior, and her mom walks away. So we can say that's more escape. And then Dana asks her mom lots of questions and is ignored. She yells at her mom, and her mom yells back at her. So that's more of an attention function. So again, this is why you cannot focus on what the behavior is, because these are 3 different kids doing the same behavior for 3 different reasons. But this could also be all of John doing the same behavior for 3 different reasons as well. So being very careful that you're not assuming that it's a certain function because of what the behavior is. You always have to get some more information and get a lot of information so you can really gather what's going on surrounding that behavior. And then on the other hand, children may exhibit different behaviors for the exact same reason. So Mike is told to start his work. He yells at mom. He is sent to his room. So that's escape. Elena is told to wipe the kitchen table. She walks off to her room and her dad ignores her. Again, escape. And then Maria's younger brother asks her to play with him. She pushes him and she is told to go to her room to calm down. So also escape, okay? So again, 3 different behaviors, but all for the same reasons. So I'm gonna have you guys practice collecting ABC data on one of the pictures. So I'm gonna model one of the pictures, and some of you guys are already familiar with this. So we're just gonna do polling for the one. So what I'm gonna have you guys do is look at the pictures, identify the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, and based on, again, at face value, what's happening in these pictures, you're going to tell me what you think the child is communicating through the behavior, and then also identify the function. Typically, whatever you're saying that this child is saying with the behavior, it should align with the function that you identify. So if I was to say, I don't want to be in bed, is what she's communicating through that behavior, then I would say that the function of the behavior is escape. So let me show you the poll for this one and I'll walk you through it. You guys don't have to do it unless you want to. And I'm showing the wrong one. Okay, here we go. All right, so just to kind of orient you to what I'm asking you to do. So antecedent, what is the antecedent? I would say mom says, go to bed is the answer for number 1. Number 2, what is the target behavior? I would say the child screams, waves arms, and cries is the target behavior or the answer for 2. The consequence, what does the child do, or what is the consequence to the behavior? I would say that the child is up, sitting next to mom, watching TV. So mom allows her to stay up and sit next to her and watch TV, right? Then what is the child communicating? So in this example, she's communicating a lot. So this is multiple choice. I would click, I don't want to go to bed. Mom, I want to stay with you longer. Or I want to watch TV. It could be all 3 of those things, right? And then 5, what is the function or functions of the child's behavior? So this is also multiple choice. So if I was going to say it's all 3 of these things, then I could say that it's escape, attention, and tangible. So we all have to figure out, well, what is going to stop the behavior? What is going to get her to stop yelling and screaming? because mom could just turn on the TV in her room and she'll stay in the bed without mom, and we can say that it was just tangible. She just wanted the TV. So we definitely need to have more information. And if you have a parent that is like throwing every single consequence at a behavior, it's very important to have a discussion with them as far as what is going to result in the behavior stopping. So if you think about a crying baby, a baby will stop crying if they're hungry and you feed them. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. The baby cannot say those things. They can't do anything else but cry. So you have to kind of do your detective work and figure out what need is it that I need to meet for this baby right now to stop crying. The behavior is the same thing. What do I need to do to get you to stop tantruming, cursing, yelling, hitting yourself, hitting others? And we're gonna do that in the BB Quip, and you'll kind of see what that looks like, okay? So that's just my example. Okay, so you guys practice with this next one. So looking at the pictures at face value, antecedent, behavior, consequence, but then also what's the child communicating and what is the function? And give 5 more seconds. I see you guys are actively responding, so I'll give it a couple more seconds. I think that's probably, all right, I'm gonna end the polling. All right, so let's share. So you guys all agree that mom walks in and places a matching task in front of the child is the antecedent. You guys all agreed that the behavior is the child screams and waves arms. So again, it's not tantrum, it's not, you know, just a general term. It's really what we see the behavior, what the child's doing. What is the consequence? 100% of you guys agree that mom takes the pictures and walks away. 100% agree that the child is communicating through this screaming and waving. I don't want to do this, right? And then we can say that the function of the target behavior is escape. Excellent, you guys, awesome. So what you guys are gonna do for your families is try to navigate them through either collecting ABC data or talking about the behavior in these terms. So we already do it as parents, I think, when we're describing like a situation, but if they're just like, oh, he's acting up today, or he's refusing to do his work assignments, just walk them through like, well, what happened right before? What was he doing? Was he playing on his screen time? Was he asleep? You know, whatever. Yeah, I had to wake him up, and then I said, you know, time to do your lessons. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then what happened? Oh, he started yelling and cursing and whatever. And then I would ask, okay, and then how did you respond to that? You know, so it doesn't have to be like, what was the antecedent to the behavior? You can just ask them, like, what happened right before he started cursing you out? And they'll give you the information. So then you can walk them through that discussion so you can get an understanding as to what's happening before and after the behavior. So it's 10:34. I'm going to walk you guys through the BB Quip, and then we're going to take a break, okay? Because I want to make sure that I'm mindful of your time. So let's just go to the BB Quip and walk through these. Okay, so at what times is cursing most likely to occur? So this is getting to that, like, when is it most likely to happen? So how you do this on the BB Quip, it says if you want to select multiple times, be sure to hold down the control key. So I have these ranges here so I can show you what I did here. So I just clicked and dragged here, and then I click control, and then I can click 7, 8, and 9. All right, and then I let go and click off of it. If you scroll with your mouse, because if you don't click off of it and you scroll, then you're gonna lose your answer, okay? So I'm teaching y'all all the little tips and tricks here to be successful. All right, so when is cursing more likely to occur? So again, these are slow triggers. So he's, TT is most likely to start cursing if he like did not sleep very well the night before, if he's not with his primary teacher at school, and if he's experiencing an unexpected change in his routine, okay? Cursing is least likely to occur when we want to be sure that we're paying attention to when the behavior is usually not happening, because that's an idea as to what may be going on or how we can set him up for success. So here we have, he's least likely to start cursing when dad is at home or when the coach checks in with him in the morning at school. Not sure why, but that's how, that's what has been observed. There might be some other stuff going on, but that's kind of what we see, right? The following seem to occur immediately before cursing, so select all that apply. So typically if he's told no, or he's completing a task or activity, or when he's given an instruction. If none of these apply as an antecedent, this is your immediate trigger. If these don't apply in any way, or you want to be more specific, please, by all means, you could select it, or you can click here and type in whatever it is that's going on, so that you have exactly what's going on with that particular student. So once you do that, you click next, and then you're gonna have the list of antecedents that you selected or typed in here. So typically being told no when he's completing a task or activity or given an instruction. So I'm gonna say specifically for mom, since I'm supporting mom, when being told to clean his room or wash dishes. So remember, we identified that those are things that he really doesn't like to do. And those don't necessarily have to go hand in hand, but that's typically the triggers. If he's being told to clean his room or wash dishes, that's when we see the cursing start to occur, all right? And then the common consequences. So you might have a family, again, that's throwing all types of consequences and responds very differently depending on the situation. So this is your opportunity to get all those different consequences. So sometimes I ignore, sometimes I talk to him, sometimes I fuss at him and reprimand. Sometimes I withdraw the request. I say, you know what, forget it. Sometimes I take away a privilege, all right? Sometimes I offer a different activity. You could do something else. Let's see, anything else? Nope, nope, nope. That's it. So when he curses, I might say, forget it, don't wash the dishes. I don't care if you do it anyway. Sometimes I just ignore it. Sometimes I talk to him like, cursing is not okay. You can't be doing that, all right? So these are just the different ways that I may respond or mom may respond. Again, you can type in any other things that may happen that's not on that list. So here's all the things that may happen after the behavior. And we ask for you to just select the one consequence that may happen most often. So most often mom says, I just ignore the, most often mom just ignores it. All right. So that may be what happens most often, and adults typically respond by ignoring the behavior. So when you guys get back from your break, we're gonna go through the rest of the PowerPoint here, right? And then we're gonna get into the behavior stopping and all that good stuff, okay? So stop there when you get to it, and then take a 10-minute break. So if you guys can get back at, well, say it's 10:40 now. So if you come back at 10:50, then we'll continue on and end at 12. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat in the meantime, if there's anything that you have questions about. But as for now, you have a break until 10:50. All right, we are back. Hopefully you guys are making your way back to your devices. So let's jump in. Let me make sure that I can see chat. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, so hypothesis statements. These identify the triggers. So you guys just filled out a bunch of information about this, the child, about the antecedents, the consequences, what the behavior is, when they typically happen, so on and so forth. So a hypothesis statement is going to summarize all that information in a little narrative summary so that you can have all that information together, and then you can have a better guess as to what the function of the behavior is. I think I skipped a slide. Maybe I didn't. Okay, so the motivation assessment scale is another piece that's associated with the BB-QIP. So I did not get to tell you that the brief behavior questionnaire and intervention plan was designed by our center director, Dr. Daniel Crimmins. And along with that, he co-authored the motivation assessment scale. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. So if you are unsure of the hypothesis, or you want some more information from the family, or even if you are doing this as an educator, you can do the motivation assessment scale to kind of get a better idea as to what the motivators are that's reinforcing the challenging behavior, and it'll help you to identify function and confirm maybe your hypothesis that you gathered from doing the first part, or the understand piece of the BB-QIP. So Gabriella here, this is just kind of an overall hypothesis summary of the situation that's been happening. So after conversations with the parents, or after collecting data, this is overall the 3-term contingency that's been happening at home. So context, Gabriella is playing on her screen time in her room, and it's time for her to start her virtual learning assignments. Mom says, "Come to the table, Gabriella." So that is the antecedent that triggers. So she yells, "It's not fair. Why do I have to do work?" All right, so that's typically what she says. And then mom gives her 5 more minutes of screen time. Okay, so we can kind of hypothesize that it could be 2 functions going on here. So one, I want to be on my screen a little bit longer, or it could be I don't want to do schoolwork, or it could be both. So just that is one thing where one behavior can have 2 functions, especially when it comes to transitions. So you really have to dig a little bit deeper there too, and see, like, if she wasn't playing on her screen, would she transition to her work okay, right? Would she still say, "I don't want to do work," or whatever? If she was not on the screen and the parents like, no, if she was just laying in her bed, not doing anything, and I said it was time to come do her work, she would transition fine. So we could say that it's not necessarily the work that she wants to escape, it's more about the screen. All right, so those are kind of things that you have to dig a little deeper to see exactly what it is. So here we're gonna assume that it is both. So when playing with the screen in bedroom and prompted to transition to other activities like her schoolwork, Gabriella engages in non-compliance by saying, why do I have to do work? It's not fair. When this occurs, adults usually respond by giving her more time on her screen. As a result, the behavior stops. All right, so that's a key thing there. When she's given more time with her screen, the behavior stops. Gabrielle is communicating, I want to be on my screen and I don't want to do work. The function of the behavior is tangible and escape. Okay, so if you have something that is 2 functions with the BB-QIP right now, you can really only select one. We're going to figure out a way where we can have multiple functions, and it'll give you other situations where you'll get tangible prevention strategies and escape prevention strategies. But for right now, if you do have a behavior that is multiple functions, I would say pick the one that occurs more often. So if she has access to screen time more often and is engaging in the non-compliance when she's just on the screen, then we can do some tangible prevention strategies. Or it could be if it's always, she just doesn't want to transition to work at all, no matter what she's doing before, and it's just a transition to work, then we could do more of the escape type route. So if you have questions about that or have someone that has multiple functions and you're trying to work through the BB Quip, just reach out to us and we can help you with that. Especially since we have our office hours, we can help you with that, okay? So let's go to the BB Quip. We're gonna start here and we're gonna work through to the point where we agree and select the function. So let me go to my BB Quip. Okay, so this is the fun part. This is the part that I really, really like because this kind of walks you through really trying to figure out what the child is communicating through their behavior. So how does the child typically react to the consequence of ignoring the behavior, by ignoring the behavior by adults? So see what you type in kind of like makes things a little weird. So anyway, so what usually happens when the behavior is ignored, then cursing stops most of the time. So if mom just ignores it and just lets him spew it off for 3 to 4 minutes and does not engage in any type of way, it'll stop, right? So, but in that ignoring, it also includes that she's not really following through either. She just ignores it and goes about her business or doing whatever she was doing. So when TT engages in cursing, which of the following statements is mostly true? So with this, you're gonna have 4 options here. So remember, we're trying to figure out what's going to meet the need of that particular behavior. So I selected for TT. It makes the most sense that allowing him to escape or avoid or delay the unwanted tasks, washing dishes and cleaning his room, would most likely stop and or reduce the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior, okay? Giving him attention or reacting to the cursing is not gonna stop the behavior because it's not about my attention. Giving access to a preferred item or activity is not gonna stop the behavior because it's not that I'm transitioning off of anything that he wants at that particular time. The blocking the behavior seems to be the only way to stop or reduce the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior because the behavior itself is reinforcing. This is going towards that sensory function. This will only be if you are saying that this behavior is occurring because they enjoy cursing. So he's not going to be in a room cursing over and over just because he loves cursing and it's cool words to say. So it's not necessarily going to be this, right? It's only going to be kind of like the nail biting, for example, is kind of like that sensory behavior. So the only way to really stop it is if I put your hands down or try to block it, because something about biting your nails feels good, and that's the only way I can stop you from doing it, all right? So for TT, I'm gonna put the escape will be most likely to stop the behavior. So here, this is a section where moving forward that you can copy and paste this whole section into like an email, Word document, whatever, and share it with whoever you need to that is familiar with the student or is familiar with like hypothesizing functions and you just want someone else to put their eyes on the information. So here, this is a summary of the things that I wrote for TT. So TT engages in cursing. The behavior is most likely to occur when TT is having difficulty sleeping at night, not with his or her primary teacher, or experiencing an unexpected change in routine or schedule. The behavior is least likely to occur when y'all didn't even tell me I had that grammatical error. So his dad is at home and when the coach checks in with him in the morning at school. The antecedent to cursing is being told to clean his room or wash dishes. Adults typically respond by ignoring the behavior, and as a result, cursing stops most of the time. It is possible that allowing the child to escape, avoid, or delay the unwanted task, activity, place, or person would most likely stop and or reduce the frequency, duration, or intensity of the behavior. So what do you think TT might be communicating by cursing? So I'm going to select the statement that seems to be true most often. So you have a ton of examples here that you can choose from. So now, because it's more of like, I don't want to do this, I'm feeling like, okay, he's told to wash his dishes, clean his room, he curses. If I let him escape or avoid, then I'm gonna look for that escape or avoid word here and see if that's what he's communicating. So TT appears to be communicating, I don't wanna do this. That's pretty true. Or is he communicating, I don't wanna be here? So it's a particular place. Or is he saying, I don't want to be around this person? So for TT, this is a more, I don't want to do this. So if you have someone that's more of an attention function based on like what you said, would result in the behavior stopping, you can look at that. I want someone to pay attention to me. I want a reaction from someone, so on and so forth. If you picked attention up here, but that doesn't make sense as far as what they're communicating, read the different ones and see if there's one that works best for the situation that's outlined here, okay? So then we move on from that. So remember we talked about the motivation assessment scale. You will add up your total score if you did it, if you completed it, and then you would write the total score here. If not, then you can write an A or you could just move forward. The antecedent to cursing is being told to clean his room. So this is just kind of summarizing it again, because the assumption is that you took a break from it, you sent it to someone else, you got their feedback, and now you're coming back to confirm that you have selected the correct function. And so IGRF, that's me, and at least one other person agreed that the function of cursing is to escape or avoid. Okay, so we're gonna stop there, because when you select this function, remember I told you you can only really select one, and then it will lead you to your prevention and replacement. So since I selected avoid, it's going to then show me into the prevention strategies for escape avoidance. If I selected attention, then it's going to take me to questions about attention, and so on and so forth. So let's go back to the PowerPoint and look at some prevention strategies, and then we'll come back to the BB clip. Okay. And again, oh, we already had our break. So if you have any questions, if I'm going too fast, please chat in the chat box, but I think you guys are following me okay. All right, so just a quick review. I'm gonna put a poll up, and I want you guys to share with me the 4 functions of behavior. Let me get the poll. What are the 4 research supported functions that we described in this presentation? Oh, it's not multiple? Okay, just type it in the chat box. Thank you, Christy. Okay, Miss Robinson. See you, Robinson D. Okay, eats. Yeah, James, you took the easy way out. Yep, eats. Excellent. Escape, attention, tangible, sensory. I love it. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that polling. Okay, so we're all on the same page that those are the 4 research supported functions. So any of our strategies that we put in place moving forward has to match those 4 functions, okay? So we're gonna first talk about prevention and some general prevention strategies again, but then we're gonna go into each different function and talk about just some overall function-based prevention strategies that you can implement with your students, or that parents can implement with their children at home. I think what we're gonna do, because it seems like most people have suggested that it's more of like non-compliance or defiance, but we can't assume that that is just escape. We really have to know what else is going on, because it may be some sort of attention component happening with some of those behaviors as well, all right? So with prevention, we are all in a state of a nationwide public health prevention campaign of making sure that we are wearing our masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and also washing our hands like crazy, right? So we want to make sure that we are putting some things in place to prevent some of these behaviors from happening. And sometimes it could be a really quick fix, just a switch in how you interact with the student or the child that can change the behavior or change that trigger. Or sometimes you might have to go a little bit more intense and put something else in place to prevent those behaviors. So we're gonna focus on the prevent piece first, and then we'll get to the replacement. So always remember to refer back to your tier 1 strategies. Those should always be in place. You don't stop doing your tier 1 strategies just because you're doing an intensive intervention for a challenging behavior. So continue talking to your child, giving clear directions, having that schedule, just have those basics in place and see if that's enough. Okay. If not, you always also want to check in to make sure they understand what the request is or what the expectations are for that particular day. You could check in at the beginning of the day and just say, okay, what's the expectations for today? And just go through them. They may be like, oh, mom, you know, whatever, we're going to go through it. And so that we're all on the same page. All right. So we can also preempt challenging behavior by prompting the appropriate behavior or social skill or reminding them of the expectations before it happens. Prevention strategy that's very useful at times, just depending on the child or the student, are the use of visual supports. So, you know, we use, and some of you guys may use some of these visual supports. I know I use my calendar on my work calendar more than I do like writing down in a planner. And some people use their phone calendars a lot more. So whatever works for you, but you know, as an adult, you have these things in place, some visual schedules and visual reminders and supports. Our kids may need the same thing, but they're gonna need a little bit more assistance in getting those things in place for themselves. So here's some visual schedules that you can use for our older kiddos. All right, so here, we're not expecting anyone to make anything fancy at this point. Like, you know, some families, I know I don't have a printer at home, so I wouldn't be able to print anything. So making sure again that you're aligning it with the resources that the family has. Suzanne, that's a good point. Most of our schools have the agendas. I'll be honest that, yeah, they're not being used as they should be. I have a 5th grader and he has an agenda and it's not used as it could be. I tried, but I was not consistent with that either. So, but I digress on that. Just know that this could be a way to establish more of that routine. So if that's something that they haven't been using, but they have that as a resource, just kind of supporting them and showing them how they can use that agenda to set those expectations and routines for their work, that can be very helpful. I think it's the consistency though that kind of gets in the way of things, especially at home. So really making sure that you're empathizing with the family and understanding that it can be hard to stay consistent, but just do the best that they can, especially if they want to prevent some of these other challenging behaviors from happening. Here's another example for our older children that don't really need a ton of words or anything like that. Just know that we don't have to have a visual, but it's helpful. It's very, very helpful. Here's another example too of how we can use a visual support in that checklist. You guys are gonna see that I'm gonna have one for TT in my, or I'm gonna list out something for TT to use as a visual support to get his room cleaned, which is going to be very helpful. Here are some other things of like reminders of what to do in certain situations, so you don't have to be there every step of the way telling the child what to do from step to step to step. They can just have the visual with all the steps and what the expectations are for that particular activity. So when I think about TT and his washing the dishes, maybe he's not clear exactly what he needs to do during that time. So I would put like little visual reminders or words, you know, if it's a written expectations of what it is he's supposed to do during that time. First then boards create that predictability. It could be first we do this, then you can do this. So for example, first clean up your room, TT, then you can go outside, or then you can have 30 minutes of screen time, whatever the case may be. It can be visual, it can be you just say it in words, but having that first then or if then type language is helpful. And it also is helpful to break larger task into smaller steps so that it just doesn't seem as lengthy or overwhelming. Here's an example of some visual first then. So you see how like sad she looks for work, but then she can watch TV. So you want to have that visual if you need it. Like first you do your work. I know it's not as enjoyable, but as soon as you do, then you can watch some TV, okay? First put your helmet on and then you can ride your bike. Another example of what a first then could look like. It doesn't have to be pictures. You could literally just write first on a piece of paper and then on the other side of the paper and then just write out what it is. If they need something written down, or you could just say it. Another example here, this can be on a student's desk or on the desk at home, or it can be worn around or we say teacher or even the parent, or have it hanging in the workspace just so that it's available and accessible. Visual supports also improves transitions. So you can have this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and just say, hey, in 5 minutes, you're gonna have to, stop playing on your, I wanna say Chromebook, but I don't know if you use Chromebooks to play on, but 5 more minutes and we have to put the Chromebook away. Then you take the 5 away. Then when it's 4 minutes, you come and you take the 4 minutes away. So this is more visual for like those kids that we say, I don't even know if they understand the concept of time. Having this visual will help as you're doing your countdown for the minutes. It's not necessary, but if it's helpful for that student, then definitely use it. Being angry, so this is just another visual, like if you're angry, ways that you can calm down. So writing 3 things that that child can do or that student can do to calm down. So writing, I can ask for a break or whisper or say, leave me alone or take a walk. So the prepping of this is kind of that prevention of listing out what are the options for you to do if you need to calm down. Being angry, some other things here. So if it's not visual, it's just words. Here are some other things that you can share with the student so that they can calm down, even if you don't have pictures. All right, so we're gonna jump into the behavior intervention plan, but again, remember we have to use the function-based prevention intervention. So we're gonna go through each one. I'm not gonna go into real detail because I wanna be sure that we get through to 12 o'clock and I don't wanna go over, all right? So with escape avoidance, some things that you really wanna hone in on. One is you really have to identify what are they trying to escape or avoid? What aspect of this activity or this assignment or this person, do they not like? What is aversive about it? And if it's because dad is yelling every time it's time to do work, like, heck no, I don't want to do my work. Dad's just gonna yell at me and get frustrated, right? So if they say that, then we can pair dad with fun things like, dad, you say all the positive things and let me as mom be the quote unquote bad guy, right? Or play music while they're doing their schoolwork. So we don't have to end the music, we can do the little TikTok music, whatever the kids are into these days and make it fun. It doesn't have to be boring just because it's schoolwork, right? Allow them to bring a fidget item to the table as well. So you don't have to stop playing with this particular item, you can bring it to the table with you. So that's also a tangible function as well. Because if it's, you don't want to stop playing, you can bring that to the table as long as you're doing your work. You can keep doing your little fidget spinner type thing. You can show and model what the child should do, break the task down into smaller steps. So if it's a longer task, if there's 10 things to do, maybe you break it down and say, okay, do these first 3 things and then you can take a break. Then do these other 3 things and then take a break, right? Or you can set a timer and say, okay, work for 5 minutes and then you can take a break, and then you can increase the time over time as they're successful. But you may have to start off small at first so that they meet that contingency and see that you will follow through with them taking a break after 5 minutes. And then it could be 7 minutes, 10 minutes, so on and so forth. Sometimes some kids get so much in the groove with that the 5-minute timer will go off, and then you can say, okay, that's the 5 minutes. You can take a break if you want to. And then they say, oh no, I'm good. And they keep going. So then I would just say, okay, I'm gonna set the timer again for another 5 minutes since you're good. And just so you know, you can take a break after that 5 minutes or whatever the case may be. So just communicate, just try to figure out what's gonna work, because it just could be aversive. They don't wanna do it. So find some ways to make it less aversive, or try to make sure that you're giving them the escape on your terms or when they're engaging in appropriate behaviors. All right, use a visual or picture to show them what they should do if that's needed. Talked about this already. do an easier task first, then a more difficult task. So that kind of builds that momentum sometimes. If you do this easy thing first, then the difficult task won't be as overwhelming. Or some kids may like to just get the difficult task out the way and they see that an easier one is coming next. So again, it's individualized. Use a visual schedule to prepare them for transitions between activities, especially if they're transitioning to a non-preferred. Just let them know it's coming in advance. So it's not just kind of like, oh man, I got to do work today. I didn't know that. So you just have the schedule and you let them know ahead of time, like, look, between this time and this time, this is when we're doing our schoolwork. So just prepare yourself. All right. And then you also want to be sure that you're stating instructions clearly and not as questions. Something to consider, you can collaboratively establish a screen agreement between parents and children. So this is something that, man, this screen time, especially with the kids these days, it's tough. So you don't want to necessarily always have them on the screen, but at this point in time, we may have to allow them to have more time with their screens, but just try to establish like, okay, you have this amount of time with it, and then you have to do some other things. If you use your if then, if you do this first, then you get screen time, or establish screen time is only available after a certain time of day. So just be very aware of what's going on. But if you're gonna take away screen time, then you have to fill in that time with some other stuff for them to do, because if they feel like the screen is the only thing they have, we have to expose these students and kids to other activities that could be just as fun and engaging as their screens. Okay. So attention, give extra attention throughout the day or before the challenging behavior occurs, because we want to be sure that we're giving that attention up front so they're less motivated to come seek out that attention. So again, just talking with your child, acknowledging the good things that they're doing, having those conversations will minimize the need for them to engage in challenging behavior to get your attention. But it's very hard because now we're expected to work from home and give our child attention and be their teacher. So we're just kind of all over the place as parents right now. So just being sure that you're telling the families, set a timer if you need to, or making sure that right before you have, for example, this 3-hour conference call, that you spend some time with your child, maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes before, and you're just having that positive interaction. It's not a time to do digital learning when you're going to be busy for the next 3 hours. That's not quality time, you know? So just making sure that they're aware that if your child is trying to seek your attention, we have to make sure that we're giving some of that attention up front, and it's quality, positive attention as well. If you are going to be busy for a longer period of time, making sure that you are giving your child something to do and they're distracted, especially for the little ones, because if they're not engaged in anything, they will find things to do. Same for the older ones as well, but I feel like they're a little bit more chill and will just kind of sleep all day. But with the little ones, they're just up, running around, trying to get into stuff. So we have to make sure that they're distracted and they have things to do. If you need to create a wait signal, it could be a hand signal, it can be a picture, visual cue to let them know when attention is available and when it's not available. And of course, timers are always very useful. For tangible, you can offer a different item before removing a preferred item. So I like to call it kind of that trade. So before you take away the thing that they're already engaging in, you have to either have the actual item present in place where you have like, here, take this, especially if it's a kid that's like really going to throw down when you take something away. If it's more of an older child where you say, hey, do you want to do this? Yeah, sure. Okay, great. So turn off the TV and let's go do that thing, right? So you have to kind of establish what that preferred thing is first and get them thinking about it. So it's either you tell them about it if a child can understand that, or if you have to physically show them the item or activity, then do that as well. Use a timer again. Timers are very, very helpful. Just again, remember to use it for good, transitions and not so good transitions. Make it equal. Offer choices. So no, this is not available anymore, but you can have this. Or if they want something in particular, well, that's not available, but you can do this, this, or this. So giving other options that can kind of compete with the thing that they're asking for. Another thing that's not on here though is out of sight, out of mind. So like if I know I don't want my child to eat candy all day, I'm not gonna have candy sitting on the countertop or in a candy bowl and where I have to keep saying, no, you can't have it, no, you can't have it, or take something away. So I'm gonna hide the candy bowl in my room, in my closet, and lock the door so I don't have to worry about having to tell my child, no, you can't have something. So it's kind of the same concept with screen time as well. Or screens have some restrictions that you can put on there as well, where you don't have to, it's like the screen is just not available because you set that feature on there. So be mindful of those things and sharing that information with parents, because some parents don't know of some of those options. First then also works in this area as well for tangible. So first you do this and then you can have your preferred item or activity. Allow access to items throughout the day in the absence of problematic behaviors. And then also just having a visual as to when things are available and when it's not available. That predictability again. So like if I'm used to getting particular items or activities throughout the day and it's just not clear when those things are available or when they're not, then it's kind of like that parents, like they ask for this over and over and over repeatedly, and I have to keep telling them no, later, no, later. So you have to just give them what is later, when is that, you know, so you have that visual to show them this is what that means. So we have to do these 3 things first, and then you can do this activity. So there's no reason for that child to keep asking over and over throughout the day. And then sensory and automatic, this is a little bit harder because we can't necessarily identify exactly what they're getting out of the sensory behavior. So remember, I play with my hair. So like you can't necessarily know exactly what I get out of doing it. So if you try to give me something else to replace it, it may not serve the same function for me. It may not have the same sensory stimulation. So being aware of that with our kids, we can't just give them a chew tube and expect them to chew on the rubber when they love to chew on their shirts or whatever. So just being aware that we can try to replace it, offer a different activity, try to establish a time when it's okay to do the sensory behavior and when it's not okay. So you can jump on your bed. I don't mind you jumping on your bed, but you can't jump on your bed at 1 a.m. Like you have to be asleep, right? So it's just being clear as to those expectations depending on the child's level of understanding. So then something to consider, you definitely want to choose your battles and you want to tell the parents, pick your battles. Like we're not expecting any of you guys to be perfect in navigating this whole situation right now, but here are some tips and tricks that you can try. If you say that you have to do a behavior plan, do your BB Quip and share it with them and walk them through what that's going to look like. You know, really try to just show them like you don't have to fix everything, right? And you can ignore some things or let some things go and be aware of what their expectations are for their kids at this time, because we can't have very super high expectations for anyone right now because all of us are in this kind of space of trying to figure out what life is going to look like, right? Even just next week. So we can't have some super high expectations on our kids either. Research shows that only about 1 in 15 families have serious conflict that is harmful to the parent-adolescent relationship. So sometimes we just have to let things go. We can't argue and nitpick on every single thing our kids are doing. And I feel like I'm preaching to myself right now. Again, we're not perfect, we're all human. So we're just emphasize that when you're talking to the parents, and maybe it's the first conversation as far as prevention of challenging behavior is helping them to adjust their expectations and choosing their battles, okay? Maybe that should have been on the very, very first slide. All right, so let's go to the function-specific prevention interventions in the BB Quip. So this one, remember I clicked for TT here. It is to escape or avoid, so I'm gonna click that, and it's gonna ask me, TT engages in cursing to escape or avoid which of the following? He is not wanting to do lengthy tasks. I don't think cleaning his room is difficult. I don't find washing dishes difficult. I can also ask TT, like, why don't you want to clean your room? And he could tell me, oh, it's just so long. You know, it just takes so much time, right? So I would say it's a lengthy task, but you can say they want to escape or avoid certain peers or siblings. They just don't want to be around that person. Or if they don't want any sort of attention or social interaction, they're trying to escape or avoid anyone interacting with them. That's what this is. If you click one and it doesn't take you to like any of the strategies that you think are helpful, you can always go back. Just remember, you can go back and change your answers if you need to, okay? So lengthy tasks. So here are a list of escape maintain function-based prevention strategies for escape maintain behaviors. So you can select up to 3. It could be 1, it could be 2, right? But you don't want it to be too much where it's overwhelming for the family to implement these strategies. But if it makes sense and they kind of go hand in hand, then it's totally okay to pick up to 3 or more, just depending on the situation. So here it reminds you of what the antecedent is. So remember, it's the antecedent modifications that we're focusing on here. So the most common antecedent is being told to clean his room or wash dishes. And the function is to escape or avoid lengthy tasks, right? So here you have these options. Oops, I already clicked down here, but you can look under difficult or lengthy tasks or assignments for some suggested strategies under there. If they're just trying to escape or avoid instructions or demands in general, they're just overall not following any directions, there's some strategies under there. If they don't want to work with a certain peer or they don't want to be around a certain sibling, then these are some strategies here listed under that category. So for TT, he does not want to do difficult or lengthy tasks. So I chose for him, and you can copy and paste it, or you can specifically, well, you should really specifically put what that looks like. So I copied and paste. I'm going to chunk the assignment by dividing longer tasks into shorter sections and allow short breaks in between. So for example, cleaning his room involves folding clothes, putting away clothes, vacuuming the carpet, and making his bed. So I will write, the parent will write each separate task on the whiteboard in his room so that he can clean his room throughout the day and check it off as it's completed. Parents will check the board at the end of the day. And then we can say, you know, if he does, we can establish if he does 3 out of the 4 tasks that's listed on there, he gets some sort of additional reinforcer. That may not be function-based. It might be he gets an extra few minutes of screen time. If he does all of the assignments, then you want it to be a big reward and say, thank you so much for cleaning your room. You get, you know, but it has to be based on what that child likes. So with TT, he loves how it's made. So he could watch 3 or 4 episodes of how it's made if he finishes all his tasks on his checklist for that day, right? And then washing dishes is another issue. So washing dishes will be completed with dad. So that could be where we're pairing it with a fun activity. So remember, dad, he does not engage in the cursing when dad is in the home. So when it's time to wash dishes, dad will be the one to kind of be with him and wash the dishes with him. So TT will wash the dishes. I wash dishes by hand, so this is my example. And that's, again, if it has to be feasible for the family. So we couldn't write something in here that says he'll put the dishes in the dishwasher and press start if that's not what the family has in their home, right? So it has to be based on what the family can do. So TT will actually physically wash the dishes and dad will be there with him to rinse and put them to dry. And then once they're dry, TT will be responsible for putting the dishes away. Okay, so that's our prevention strategy for these 2 situations that's happening, that's causing the cursing to occur. okay? So when we click next, we're gonna go into the replacement behavior piece, but before we get into that, let's talk about it on the PowerPoint, okay? I'm speeding through a little bit, but I think we're doing okay on time. We have about 30 more minutes. And again, even though I'm speeding through, we're still here to support you. So you can always reach out to us or come to our office hours during the dates, and I'll share that with you guys again. Okay, so we're doing replacement now. So again, it has to be function specific. So you guys may be familiar with this quote already. So this is part of the IPBS process that requires that we teach the child how to behave. So you know how we have, you know, if they don't know how to read, we teach them how to read. If they don't know how to swim, we teach them how to swim. But when it comes to if they don't know how to behave, we usually punish or try to discipline this particular child into behaving. But we also have to teach them how to behave. So we're going to talk about how to teach new ways of communicating their wants and needs, either for attention, if they need a preferred item or activity, or if they just need a break or something taken away or removed. So here are some examples of challenging behaviors that occur when a child wants to escape or avoid something. All right, so this is Jamila, for example. Jamila, when mom tells Jamila to set the table, she yells at her mom that she's busy, and mom yells back at Jamila to get herself to the kitchen and set the table. Mom tells Jamila to get out of her pajamas and to put her day clothes on, and Jamila ignores her mom's request and continues reading her book. Mom yanks Jamila's book out of her hands. Mom tells Jamila to start her schoolwork. Jamila says she hates school and shouldn't have to do work at home, which isn't okay. Anyway, which is probably very valid in what's happening right now, right? So anyway, mom leaves Jamila alone and gets back to doing her own work, which may be happening right now, right? So these are things that your parents are maybe experiencing or explaining that's what's happening. So we have to do some replacement behaviors and just teach them a different way to ask for the things that they want, but we have to make sure that they're getting what they're asking for, especially if they're engaging in that replacement behavior. So for example, mom tells Jamila to set the table. Instead of yelling, she says, can I have 2 more minutes to finish reading this chapter? And mom says, yes, you can. But just make sure at that 2 minutes or when she does finish the chapter to follow through and make sure she sets the table afterwards and making sure you acknowledge that she follows the direction. Mom tells Jamila to get out her pajamas and put her day clothes on, and Jamila asks if she can eat breakfast in her pajamas and then change into her clothes. That's valid. And this is picking battles again, because remember, sometimes our kids are engaging in some of these replacement behaviors or these appropriate behaviors, and they're not being rewarded. We're saying, no, do what I told you to do. What did I say? No, why do we have to, you know? So you have to think about how picking those battles and how are you responding to your kids already engaging in some of these behaviors. And if you have been denying access to these things, and then your child has started to then engage in the challenging behavior to get the escape, you know, we might be teaching these things. So it's very, very important that you're talking to the families and seeing, is Jamila already asking appropriately for breaks? What does she say already? Because we may not even have to select a whole new skill to teach. It really is just about, mom, we just have to change how you're responding to those appropriate requests, okay? And then mom tells Jamila to start her schoolwork. Jamila says she doesn't understand her work, and mom sits down with Jamila and helps her with her schoolwork, okay? All right, so for attention, we have Marco. So dad sleeps in late, so he's still sleeping. Marco begins playing his drums and dad walks in and says, stop making all that noise. So he gets that attention for playing the drums, right? Mom is on the phone. Marco hands her his completed schoolwork. Mom says, I can't look at this right now, okay? Mom is working on her computer. Mark taps her on the shoulder. Mom says, not now, right? So that was kind of where I was getting at, where there might be some appropriate behaviors happening, but we may not be rewarding it correctly. So sometimes our kids will start engaging in challenging behavior to kind of see, okay, how can I get the attention that I'm looking for? So some replacement behaviors: dad sleeps in late. So Marco can crawl into bed with dad, right? And dad continues to sleep, but Marco is next to him, and that's good enough. Mom is on the phone. Marco sits by his mom, and after she ends her call, he shows her his work. Mom says thank you, and they look at the work together. Mom is working on her computer. Marco hands her a note that says, I need to talk when you're available. Mom reaches a stopping point in her work and talks to Marco. So if you see that that's the replacement piece. But here, these aren't like super challenging, but it could be that we have to just put a very simple prevention strategy in place to show Marco, like, hey, when I'm busy, I don't mind looking at your work, but you just have to, wait for me to end the call, or you have a signal to say, my attention is not available. So he understands that he has to wait. So the prevention pieces come in play with these replacement behaviors as well. All right, so tangible. So screen is on top of the shelf. Robert yells while asking, where's his screen? Mom hands Robert the screen. Robert and mom drive past McDonald's. Robert begins complaining about how he hates eating at home, and then mom buys Robert food from McDonald's. A chocolate bunny is in the refrigerator. Robert eats it without asking permission, and mom yells at Robert. Okay, so here are some other ways that they can get access, or Robert can get access to the things that he wants. So the screen is still at the top of the shelf, but he quietly asks his mom if she's seen his screen, and mom hands Robert the screen. Robert and mom drives past McDonald's and asks if it would be possible to eat McDonald's today, and mom buys him food. And then a chocolate bunny is in the refrigerator. He asks mom if he can eat it first, because this can cause some arguments, right? Don't eat my chocolate bunny. You go into that refrigerator and it's not there. That causes some problems, right? So just making sure he knows, just ask for the things that you want before just taking it. And then yes, you can have it, but you just gotta wait till after dinner, okay? So those are just some examples of some replacement behaviors for the social function, so escape, tangible, and attention. For sensory, it's a little bit harder for a replacement behavior, because this is just showing that the behavior itself is reinforcing, okay? So the humming of the song or jumping in the puddle, right? They remain alone. They're just in his room alone. He's humming. She's walking around the neighborhood, jumping in puddles. She remains alone, jumping in puddles. There's no real consequences there. No one's responding. It's just maybe she's enjoying the splashing of the water. He loves the feeling of humming on his throat, or whatever the case may be. And they just continue to engage in that behavior. So these are examples of just sensory behaviors that don't need any sort of replacement or prevention strategies. It is what it is. And we all have these sensory seeking behaviors. So we want to be mindful that we're not taking away a behavior that could be soothing or calming for a student or a child, because it may be annoying or frustrating for us. All right. So when it comes to replacement skills, it just makes the challenging behavior unnecessary, but it has to fulfill the same purpose as the challenging behavior. So if the child wants attention, when they're engaging in the challenging behavior, making sure that you're giving attention when you're teaching them, or when they're using a more appropriate or that replacement behavior. This is the essential part of the intervention plan. So you want to be sure not only do you have your prevention strategies, but you have your replacement behaviors as well. Now, this one is a big one where it has to require less effort than the challenging behavior. So it's easy for me to yell, scream, curse words for 3 to 4 minutes, whatever. It gets my anger out, whatever the case may be. So if you're trying to have a replacement behavior for that, for escape, for example, then you don't want it to be where they have to write down their request, then hand it to you, wait 5 minutes, and then they get a break, right? So that's gonna take too long, that's too much effort. So I'm gonna engage in the cursing and stuff to get out of it, because that's easier. So you just wanna make sure that you're not trying to get them to engage in very significant effort behavior to get their same needs met. So the acceptable behavior must meet the same function as the challenging behavior, and I already gave an example of that. So when you're teaching new skills, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with teaching. If you need some support with that, it's a little bit harder over the virtual computer to like be able to model this for parents on how to teach, depending on the level of skill for the student. But just keep in mind that when we're trying to teach them a new skill or have them engage in new behaviors, we can't just expect them to do it because we tell them to. They may need some reminders or some prompts. So we want to make sure that we're giving some physical prompting if we need to, vocal prompting. So you tell them exactly what it is that you want them to do or say. For example, you know, some parents might say, I told him to use his words. But if he had the words to say in this moment or to ask for whatever it is that he wants in that moment, then he would. So you have to give him the words. So just tell them exactly what you want him to say. It could also be like a textual prompt. You write it down and they read what it is that they need to say, like a script or what they need to do. So someone isn't having to be there to prompt them through that. And then gestural or model, you can show them exactly what it is that they need to do, demonstrate it so it could be more clear. So with TT, if cleaning his room, if he's never done it before, does not know how to fold clothes correctly, then that could be a new skill to teach, not to necessarily replace the cursing, but it's more of like, oh, maybe he's not doing it because he doesn't really know how to fold clothes. So you might model it for him to show him how to do it. So we usually do, oh, excellent. Christy shared a resource. Awesome. Thank you, Christy. So with teaching new skills, there's most to least prompting, where we call it errorless teaching, because some skills are brand new. So if it is, we want to be sure that we're giving as much help up front to reduce errors and reduce frustration. Because if I keep telling my student to do something that they don't know how to do and I'm not helping them, it's going to be frustrating. They're going to give up and they're going to engage in challenging behavior. So if I need to physically guide you at first and just show you how to do it using hand over hand, that's what I'm going to start off with. If I'm using the controlling prompt where I don't need to hand over hand physically guide you, I can just be next to you with my own toothbrush and model it for you and you'll follow my movements, then I will start there. Then as you do well, I'm going to start fading out my prompts. So if I'm modeling with you, then maybe I might model the first few seconds and then I'll stop and have you to continue going. So that's kind of that second level of guidance over time. And then eventually we want to get them to the point where they're doing it completely independent and not needing any prompts, because that's the ideal. We don't need to prompt them at all and they're able to use that new skill without any issues. Backward chaining is a good example, like when you break stuff, the steps down into a task analysis and you break it down by step. So remember I showed you like washing hands or washing face, breaking each step down into smaller steps. Then you can learn or you can teach how to, oh yeah, here's your task analysis right here. So you could teach how to brush teeth by starting with the last step first. So you kind of prompt or help through steps 1 through 7, and then you kind of give that independent opportunity for them to do brushing teeth for 2 minutes, and you start there. Then you start teaching them how to throw the flosser away, so on and so forth. So you want to be sure that you're using the teaching method that's most applicable for the skill and what's going to be reasonable for that child to do. All right, so back to the BB Quip. And I'm hoping that some of you are going through this together so you can see your plan at the very end for your student. So for TT, he does not want to clean his room or wash dishes, and he's cursing. So what else can he do instead of cursing to escape or avoid a task? And sorry, had to take a sip there. For TT, I would say for like He can ask to delay the task. Like the prevention strategy right now is that it's broken down for cleaning his room anyway. So, you know, maybe they do have a check-in at midday or whatnot, like, hey, did you start cleaning your room yet? Just checking, you know, how you doing on your checklist? And then he can say, oh, I'm gonna, you know, is it okay if I start at 2 p.m. or whatever? So just asking to delay the task would be appropriate replacement behavior instead of cursing, right? Because he's getting the delay now by cursing, right? There's just like, forget it, whatever, I don't even care. So instead of cursing, we're giving him the words to ask to delay it. And then for for washing dishes, it might just be more of asking for help because that's a lengthier task. There's a lot of steps. So he can ask dad for help, mom for help, whoever. So these are the two things that he can do. He can ask to delay it or he can ask for help. And these are the two things that I'm going to focus on for TT. So now that we've chosen that replacement behavior of asking to delay the task or ask for help. So I don't like how that looks. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to put or ask for help. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to copy and paste it. You can literally, if it's a child that you want them to say something specific, you can say, you know, teach the child to say, excuse me, you know, when mom is busy or whatever. So you can type in, detail it in this box so that you have exactly what it is that you want them to do or say. All right, so ask to delay the task, and I can say for 1 hour and be specific and set a timer and ask for help. So anyway, so first, who is the best person to teach these new skills? So who's gonna teach them to delay the task or to ask for help? And mom and dad can do that, especially in the home. If it's a school-based skill, then of course the teacher, assistant teacher, counselor, whoever has the best rapport or best positive relationship with the child, because that's who they're going to learn best from. You're not going to want to pair them with someone that they don't like to try to teach them a new skill to replace the challenging behavior. That's not going to work. Then how can mom or dad establish rapport? So remember, TT's favorite items or activities were playing video games, hanging out with friends, watching how it's made. So at home, mom and dad can schedule, and maybe I won't put my mom and dad, I'll just say schedule a time for watching how it's made as a family, right? So we're building that positive interaction, and dad can play video games with TT, all right? So we're just gonna spend some quality time, have a good time, and then so once he's like, oh, they're pretty cool, I love it, then we can start getting him to comply with, hey, buddy, you know, instead of cursing, you can really just ask to delay it for, you know, cleaning your room for an hour. So instead of cursing, you know, just say, can I have 1 more hour before I start to clean my room? And we'll definitely say yes to that. And you can tell them what the reinforcer is going to be, right? Anyway, so when is the best time or situation to teach the new skill? So ask to delay that's the new skill. So I have to change some of this. Anyway, so when is the best time? The best time is typically when the challenging behavior is not occurring or when you have a good time to teach it. We list here, these are times when they typically happen. So you want to keep in mind, like, okay, if it's happening, usually 2 or 3. So like it might be where at 2 o'clock, that's when the mom is typically coming to the child to ask them to clean their room. So before 2 o'clock, before 2 p.m., we're going to make sure we review what the expectations are. Hey, you're gonna have to clean your room at some point. Remember, we made this checklist. If you want to start a little bit later in the day, it's totally fine. All you have to say is, hey, can I start after 2 o'clock? Can I start it at 3? All right. So that's kind of where it's going to happen or when it's going to happen for the family in the home. So how does the child learn best? So this is just to make sure that we're teaching them in the best way that they can learn. So for TT, he does best by practicing or rehearsing the behavior. Some kids may, by observing others doing it, they might do a better job if they observe themselves doing it. So we might do like a video recording of them actually doing the behavior, or some kids actually watch other kids doing things, and that's how they learn how to do stuff. So you would just select the best option. I think I'm going to change this to be multiple choice because some kids learn in different ways, and sometimes practicing will be good and sometimes observing would also work. So you could select more than one. So I'll make sure that I make that change for you guys moving forward. So which method would you think is best to teach TT? So I said that practicing and rehearsing the behavior would be best. And I think direct instruction could work for him, or maybe like a little pre-teach practice would be good as well. So like he could practice the correct responses, and then as the skill, as needed in the future, then I can just remind him, remember what we learned or remember what we talked about, okay? So I'm gonna click next on that. How would others respond or reinforce? I think I might be going too far. Let me see. No, I can keep going. All right, so how would they respond? So what we're looking for here is really, it has to match, right? The function of the behavior. So remember, the function is he wants to escape or avoid. So if TT asks to delay the task or asks for help, how are we gonna respond to that? So we're gonna make sure that we delay the task, right? If he asks to delay it for 1 hour, how are we gonna reinforce or respond to that? We're going to delay the activity for that hour. How are we gonna respond when he asks for help? We're gonna make sure that we help him. So let's see if that's here. Give a break, remove, stop, giving attention. So that's not necessarily on there. So I'm gonna say provide help. All right, so I'm gonna click on. So this is the page that we're stopping on, and then we're gonna go back to the PowerPoint. We have 8 minutes, so I'm gonna talk a little bit faster. So despite our best hopes and intentions to prevent the cursing, it is still likely to occur. So telling the parents that is not gonna just magically stop. So when it happens, we wanna be sure that we're responding in a way to avoid reinforcing the challenging behavior. So sometimes we can't necessarily just tell them to completely stop reinforcing the challenging behavior, because it may make the behavior get worse before it gets better. And some kids will really engage in some significant challenging behavior if you withhold reinforcement for the challenging behavior. So we don't necessarily want to set our parents up for failure. So we want to be sure that we're just telling them to minimize the amount of reinforcement that you're giving if they do engage in the challenging behavior. So it all depends on the child. So having that conversation. So for TT, he wants to escape or avoid tasks when he's cursing. So I'm going to use maybe a least to most prompting procedure to complete the task. If I have to get to the physical part where I'm physically guiding him to complete the task, if that works for TT, by all means, then we can definitely use the least to most prompting, because this is just saying that we're going to follow through with that task. So just be very aware of how many instructions you're placing, so that when you do have to follow through, you don't have to engage in this process often, okay? But there's some other options that you have here, but you can also just type in whatever else is feasible for that family. And then lastly, here on this page is a crisis plan needed for when TT engages in cursing. No, for TT, he does not engage in any dangerous aggressive behavior like hitting or property destruction, throwing things, or hurting himself in any type of way. So a crisis plan is not needed. Now, if for a family you do know with a student that it could escalate, please, by all means, write a crisis plan for this student, and it doesn't have to be anything significant. It could just be that the parents remove themselves from that area, or if they have to call the crisis line, or if they have a neighbor that they typically call to help, whatever. You write that into this box and you have it where it's described in enough detail that the family can implement it at home, okay? But for TT, that is not necessary. So we're gonna move on from that. All right, so we're gonna go to the PowerPoint really quickly. and finish this up. So taking the show on the road. So, I went ahead a little bit there. So with the responding to the challenging behavior, we talked a little bit about that. You might do the planned ignoring. You might just calmly remind them of what that replacement behavior might be, but try to avoid going back and forth and arguing with the child, because that could be reinforcing that attention-seeking behavior. And then you can also delay the task longer if you're going back and forth, back and forth. So it's just important to minimize just the engagement that is being provided for the challenging behavior. And as best as possible, try to remind parents to keep calm. Again, easier said than done, but just know that you can just tell them that you understand it's hard and you're there to support them and reach out, whatever the case may be, just so that they know that they have the support and help that they need. When little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. So that's a really good quote, because we want to be sure that we're trying to minimize us escalating and getting out of control with our own behaviors. Something to consider too, just know that with our older kids, we will have some times where we just do not agree, and we have to just really try to avoid going back and forth and arguing. So making sure to treat each other with respect and listen to each other's point of view. Now, we're usually the adult in the situation, so we can do a little bit better with the treating with respect and listening. Sometimes it's hard when the child is not doing the same, but we have to model the behaviors that we want them to engage in. We have to work collaboratively toward a solution, and just keep in mind that arguments are common in families with teens. So don't, if families are like, what am I doing wrong? I don't understand. He's always upset, where she's always arguing with me. Just, it's normal, you know, quote unquote normal. So just let them know that, you know, it's not something that's out of the ordinary, and just try to guide them through that situation. So when we think about reinforcers, I went through this a little bit with you guys, just saying that whatever the reinforcer is, it has to match the function. So for example, if we are asking the child to ask for a break or ask for help instead of throwing assignments away in the trash, we're more than likely giving them a break if they're asking for that break, asking for help, okay? For case number 2, if they're yelling out during work time and we want them to sit quietly, but that's not happening, and we're teaching them to say, excuse me, or ask for help instead, we're probably going to give that attention and give help, right? And then the last one, they're running out of the house and we want them to stay in the house, but instead we're teaching them to request preferred items or request preferred activities. So they're running out the house because they hear the ice cream truck coming, so they just run out. So instead of doing that, they need to ask for those items first and get that permission to go out to get that item, okay? So that's how we do the function match reinforcers. These 2 terms are important to note, satiation and deprivation. Satiation just means that they have gotten so much of that reinforcer that they just no longer really want that reinforcer. So if they have a ton of screen time, then that may decrease the motivation to get access to that screen time. So if you're trying to use that as a reinforcer, you don't want them to be satiated on the items that you're using, because they're not going to work as a reinforcer. But deprivation is that you deprive them of, or you don't give them a lot of access to something in the environment, and it's going to increase the effectiveness of that reinforcer. So you may want to deprive them of certain things if you want to motivate them to work. You know, you could use this different ways, and how this is explained too is a little bit different, but you want to limit access to reinforcers in other settings as well. So if you're going to use the particular item as a reinforcer, then you have to limit access to it so it's more motivating, and vice versa. But just know, if you're depriving them of screen time, then the motivation increases. And if you don't have a plan in place and you deny access after them being deprived, then the likelihood of challenging behavior may also increase as well. Maintenance and generalization, very shortly. It's right at 12. I like to stop on time, but we are almost done. We just have a couple more slides. So just letting you know, if it's 12 o'clock and you have to jump off, please, by all means, feel free. I'm going to finish up just so that we have the rest of the recording. But just know we will share this information with you. All right. So maintenance, the child remembering the skills you taught them, you want that skill to maintain over time. So we don't want them to forget what we taught them. We want it to be useful, and we want them to be necessary in the environments that they're going to be in. If we're teaching them things that that's not going to get reinforced or they're not going to use, it's not going to maintain over time. And then with generalization, the difference between this and maintenance is that maintenance is the use of that one skill over time. And then generalization is the use of that skill across people, settings, and behaviors. So you might teach the child to talk quietly or ask quietly for their needs from maybe a few people, but then you see that they start asking for items quietly from all people in the household without having to be taught with each person. Across settings just means you might teach them to use a stop sign at the home computer for when it's not available. So then the child does not talk to mom when the stop sign is used on the computer at home for attention. And then behaviors, you might teach the child to tap mom on the shoulder when they need mom's attention instead of yelling. And then you also see the child stops yelling at mom from outside the yard as well. So you'll see kind of settings, people, behaviors that some of these skills generalize, but they don't always generalize naturally. You have to kind of teach a few different examples with a few different people to see if that skill will emerge in other areas or with other people. So we're finalizing the BB Quip here. So this is the ending if you are walking through completing one. So how will we know that TT has learned the skill, how to ask for that delay or ask for help? We're gonna say he's going to use that skill 80% of the time with minimal prompts, but mostly independently in the natural setting, okay? So that's how we'll know he's mastered that skill. And this generalization question, how will we ensure that that new skill will generalize or carry over? So I wanna make sure that he asks to delay the task across different people, especially with different adults. So I'm gonna make sure we practice with 1 or 2 different adults. So if grandma comes over, he'll also ask for delays if grandma tells him to do something. But we have to make sure that grandma knows we've taught him to ask to delay the task appropriately, so please be sure you delay it, okay? And then with asking for help, same thing. We want to make sure that he's doing that skill across people, but other situations too. So we taught him for washing dishes and cleaning room, but there might be some other tasks that is added to his plate or his chores, and we want to be sure that he asks for help and asks to delay those tasks as well, okay? Next, this part is the progress monitoring piece. So you guys as educators always are collecting data, right? So we want to be sure that we are recommending our families to collect some information if possible, but we don't want it to be too overwhelming. So just kind of ask them to keep in mind, you know, how is the problem behavior changing? Do we want them to collect data daily, 3 times a week, 2 times a week? So we can say maybe at least 3 times out of the 7 days a week, we'll ask them to collect data on the cursing. And it could just be, remember it's occurring or lasting 3 to 4 minutes per incident. So we might ask them to collect some duration data on there because that's how we were tracking the behavior before, okay? So 3 days a week, they'll kind of start tracking how often or how long the episodes are lasting. And who will collect the data? Just mom and dad, because it's happening at home. So with the replacement behavior, we want them to track how often is he actually using this skill as well. So we'll just say at least 3 days a week as well for that. It could be the same 3 days. And we're gonna just do frequency and rate. For him, we don't have to worry about prompt level. We're just able to kind of practice it with him and give him a few reminders throughout the day. So we don't necessarily need to track, did he need a full physical prompt? Did he need a partial prompt? Did he just need a model prompt? Okay, so we're just gonna do frequency or rate of how often he's actually using that new skill. And mom and dad will also be collecting that data. All right. And then progress monitoring, when will that be reviewed? So you're asking the parents to collect this information at home. So we want to make sure that we're reviewing it so they know they're not just taking data in vain. So we're going to check in with them within 2 weeks after implementation, because they're collecting data at least 3 days a week. So you could do after 1 week. So after those first 3 days of data collection, we can look at it depending on what the behavior is. But for this example, we're just going to check in a couple weeks. After a couple weeks, they get some data collected and we'll check in and see, you know, is the behavior decreasing? Is the replacement skill increasing? Or what changes do we have to make to the plan? All right. So who is going to review it? Mom, dad, and GRF. That's me, the behavior specialist. We're going to review the plan and make decisions based on the data that's collected. And today's date is for 17/2020, all right? And we are done with the BB Quip. So now the formatting is a little wonky. So all you have to do here is copy, highlight everything. You see how much information you have here? Highlight all the things, and then you're gonna copy and paste it in a Word document, and then you can change the formatting. So you can bold, highlight, italicize, you know, whatever it is that you need to do. But this is going to give you everything that you just entered into the BB Quip, okay? And you can share this with a family, with other professionals, so on and so forth. So they have a background information, they have the hypothesis statement summarized and the function. If you did the motivation assessment scale, you'll have the scores here. And then you'll have your prevention strategies that were chosen, your replacement behavior, and then the instructional plan that you just typed up. All right, so that is the full BB Quip, and then you have your progress monitoring piece here. We do ask, like, if you do fill it out and this is your first time, please fill out, if you're interested, fill out a satisfaction survey, and that'll give us some feedback on how to make it better. So that's kind of how we got it into Qualtrics, because we listened to the feedback that you guys have shared in the past. All right, so as far as the presentation here, let's listen to this family wrap up their experience at the end of their PBIS experience and how it's changed their interaction with their son.
That with PBS, we've been able to go back to some of the things that just look really normal out, and just in public and restaurants we've gone to eat, and
Baseball game.
we went to a baseball game, we go to dinner, we have goals, little goals of things that we want to do that is like, okay, let's see how we can accomplish this, and then we just go ahead and figure it out and get our pictures together and
Get our social
stories, and he said, now, you know, we're gonna do this. Figured out which things have worked for our family, and I guess that's part of the PBS process, is making it work for you. And then we used it with Brendan. We do first den schedules with Brendan, which always work. Our first den schedule, the first ones we use were, you know, first do something hard for you, and then French fries, because that was always, you know, a reward. And then now our first den schedules are just like a regular routine that he can cope with. And we've been able to get away from some of the schedules too. Not completely, because he always needs them, but he's just real comfortable. As soon as he learns his routine, we don't have to resort to a picture for every little thing. And
the first couple of weeks of learning how to say things in a positive way was very difficult. I mean, you couldn't get a whole sentence out without stopping and realizing you were saying something negative. So
we had to correct ourselves, each other.
Yeah. So I think after the first couple of weeks of we finally got the hang of it, and it's interesting now to see other parents with other kids and listen to how they talk to their children. It's like, that used to be me, you know, and to see the reactions of the children when they're speaking to them that way.
And then we know what they're doing. We're like, we know what you're doing. You're telling him, don't stop, no, and you're not giving him any direction, and you're not helping him. You're not telling him what to do exactly. And so we see why your child is like that. But, you know, my child has got problems, and he's not like that. Biggest cause of celebration is having a simple day. When you know the alternative, a simple day without a tantrum is a happy day. Just happy.
Very cool. So it's helpful to hear just their journey from beginning to end, and using the strategies of PBIS and seeing that, yes, they had to do a lot of work up front, and you know, with the first, then they would do like, first do this difficult task, then French fries, because that was like the only thing that we could really motivate you to do this difficult task to do. But now it's just kind of naturally occurring schedule, and it's not first this, then French fries for everything still. So just really talking to the families that it may feel unnatural at first, and you're thinking like, why do I have to do this? But it really is helpful, and you can fade those supports over time for sure. So any questions or concerns? And I think I saw a few things that popped up in the chat. So I'm gonna go to the chat, but then you can also feel free to share your questions in the chat or unmute if you want to. Let me just share this last slide, and as just as a reminder, as the dates and times that we are available for office hours. And yeah, we're done. Thank you guys for being here. Stay safe, stay healthy. We're still here to answer any questions that you may have, but you're free to log off if you want to. Bye, thank you. Okay, so let's see.